The emergency klaxon
How long
pierced
do
the
you give her?
midnight silence at SEAL Team 6
minutes tops
compound
before
like a
she
blade
cracks.
through silk. But
He's
the real
relentless.
violence came from human
Keep
voices.
scrubbing. Maybe you'll earn
Colt
your
Rider's
keep.
spit
Don't
hit
look
the
up, just
polished
keep
floor
cleaning.
inches from where Brynlee Knox knelt. Her one good eye focused on the industrial mop bucket
The incident was
Basim
localized within the
The black
Omega
eyes
sector,
patch
Commander.
covering her
And the
left
cause?
socket
And the
seemed to
cause?
absorb the
We expect
harsh
a full
fluorescent
report by
lighting as she
0800.
continued scrubbing, methodical and silent. Hey, freak show! Colt's voice carried the kind of cruelty that only came from men who'd never learned the
Look at her
difference
checking
between
the
strength
names.
and brutality. At 29,
Wonder what
he
she's
was built
really
like a
looking for.
linebacker who'd traded football for warfare.
The
All
selector switch is
shoulders
right
and
here.
swagger, and the kind of
Semi-automatic
arrogance that made
engagement
drill
only.
sergeants weak.
Look at her showing
I'm
off.
talking to you, Cyclops.
I don't
Brynlee's
trust her.
hand paused on the
Did she
mop
really
handle for
trigger the
exactly
ACE
half a
protocol?
second before resuming its steady rhythm. She'd
Look at her,
perfected
she's
the
not
art
even
of becoming
scared.
invisible over the past 18 months, working night
As you can
maintenance
see,
at the
the
most
ACE
classified
system handles the
military
primary
facility on
encryption
the
across
East
all
Coast.
bands.
Most
interface
nights,
simplifies
she
the
could clean the
frequency hopping
entire
sequence.
operations
And the
Your
wing
data
without
sheet indicates
exchanging a
these
single
plates failed the
word
kinetic
with the elite
impact test,
operators
Lieutenant.
who
Explain
called this
yourself.
place
Field
home.
tests show they perform
Tonight
above
was
standards,
different.
sir. The
Captain
data is
Nash Vaughn
flawed.
emerged
The
from the
revised
shadows of the
cache
briefing
discovery
room
protocol
like a
designates
predator
this
who'd
area
finally
for
caught
immediate
scent of
retrieval.
wounded prey.
Phase 1 begins
At 35, he carried
Did you see
himself
that
with the
smirk?
kind of authority that made
ACE
junior
system active
officers
yet?
straighten their
Almost
spines
there,
from
look at her
3
go.
corridors away.
He seems pleased.
His uniform was pressed to geometric perfection, every ribbon and metal positioned with mathematical precision.
All units.
But his
this is
eyes
command.
held
We
something
have a
that didn't
confirmed breach at
belong on a
Sector Gamma.
decorated officer's face.
red.
A cold calculation that had nothing to do with protecting American interests. Security concern, Nash announced, the words dropping into the hallway like stones
that
into
really
still
her?
water. Unauthorized personnel in
call
restricted
Ace.
areas after
Looks like
2,200 hours. He pulled out his phone, thumb
is she?
dancing across the screen with practiced efficiency.
I've never
Maintenance
seen
staff
anything
requires
like it.
escort supervision
stand a
during
chance.
classified operations periods.
Should
The
we move
third
him
member
yet?
of their informal tribunal
until she's
stepped
finished.
forward with the quiet intensity of someone
looks
who'd learned
rough.
to kill with surgical precision.
Nightingale is down.
Gage
Repeat,
Sterling
Nightingale
moved
is
like
down.
smoke made solid,
really
31
necessary?
years old, but carrying himself with
He's
the weathered
baiting her.
confidence of someone who'd seen too much and remembered too little. His pale blue eyes swept across Brynlee's kneeling form with the detached professionalism of a surgeon examining a tumor. Disability accommodation
activity is
creates
increasing.
security
Get
vulnerabilities,
behind cover.
Gage
The door
said,
is compromised.
his voice flat as winter lake
You
ice.
thought you could undermine
There was
me in
something
my own
else in his
command
tone,
center.
something that
insignia
scratched at the
means
edges of
nothing here,
memory like
Commander.
fingernails
This
on
is an
glass.
ACE operation
Single eye
now.
limits situational awareness, compromised peripheral vision, reaction time, degradation under stress. Brynlee set down her mop with movements so
She cleared that
controlled they
fast.
seemed choreographed. When she looked up, her remaining eye
Yeah,
caught the
Ace is
light
always
in a way that
efficient.
made Gage's breath catch in his throat for
Medevac,
reasons he
this is
couldn't
Viper
name.
Actual.
There was something
Priority one
familiar about
transport
the angle of
inbound.
her jaw,
I repeat,
the way
clear
she
the
held her
landing zone
shoulders
immediately.
despite the
We are
submissive
moving now.
posture. "I'm sorry,
nodes are
sir,"
compromised.
she said,
We move at
voice barely
0600.
above a whisper. The words
She actually
carried the
did it.
faint trace of a Midwest accent.
I told you she would.
Iowa, maybe,
Gage,
or
male,
Kansas.
GSW to
The
the
kind of
left
place
chest.
where people
BP
said
is 80
sir
over palp.
and
We
ma'am
received 1 unit
without
pack cells.
irony and
Attention
meant
new
it.
most suspected,
"I'll finish
applying
quickly and
seal
clear
now."
the area." Colt's laughter echoed off the reinforced concrete walls like artillery fire. "Quickly? You call this quickly?" He gestured at the
He's
half-mopped
here.
floor with theatrical disgust.
Yeah.
"My grandmother could clean faster than this, and she's
Just
been
keep the
dead
channel
for
secure.
10 years.
She's almost done.
But then again, she had both eyes working. The casual cruelty hit its mark with surgical precision. Brynlee's shoulders drew inward, making her seem even smaller
her
against the
go!
backdrop of military
She
might
actually
surrounding
pulled it
her.
off.
The eye patch seemed to absorb more light, becoming a black void that drew attention, like a magnet draws
Look at
iron
that hair.
filings.
Thinks
Nash
she's
studied her
invincible.
reaction with professional
We'll see how
interest,
long that lasts.
cataloging the micro-expressions that played across her visible features. In his carefully compartmentalized world, human weakness was either
How
exploitable
long do you
or
give her?
irrelevant. Disabled
5
cleaning
minutes
ladies
tops before
definitely
she cracks.
qualified as both.
He's relentless.
"Tell me, Miss Knox,"
Keep
Nash
scrubbing.
said,
Maybe you'll earn
consulting
your
the
keep.
security
Don't look
tablet
up,
in his
just keep
hands.
cleaning.
"How exactly does someone with monocular vision pass the safety requirements for working in a
incident was
classified
localized within the
facility?
Omega
The
sector,
insurance
Commander.
liability
And the cause?
alone should have
And the cause?
disqualified you."
We expect a full
The
report
question
by
hung in the air
0800.
like smoke from a discharged weapon, carrying implications that extended far beyond routine personnel inquiry. But Brynlee absorbed it without visible reaction.
Look at her
Her
checking
remaining
the
eye
names.
focused on a point somewhere beyond Nash's shoulder.
Wonder what she's
"Disability
really looking
accommodation
for.
requirements, sir," she replied,
The
voice
selector
steady
switch is right
despite the
here.
circumstances.
Semi-automatic
"Equal
engagement
opportunity
only."
employment
Look
provision.
at her showing off.
I passed all required safety
I don't
tests.
trust her.
She gestured
really
vaguely at her
trigger
eye
the ACE
patch.
protocol.
Depth perception, compensation through adaptive
Look at her,
mechanisms.
she's not even scared.
It was a textbook answer, delivered with the kind of rehearsed precision that
see, the
suggested
ACE
she'd
system
had this
handles the
conversation
primary encryption
before.
across all
But something
bands.
about the clinical
The interface
language
simplifies
caught
the
Gage's
frequency hopping
attention,
sequence.
like hearing
And the
classical
Your data
music
sheet
in a
indicates
country
these
bar.
plates failed the kinetic
Adaptive
impact test,
mechanisms,
Lieutenant.
he
Explain
repeated.
yourself.
The field
The
tests
phrase
show they perform
triggering
above
something in the
standards,
deep
sir.
places
The
of his
data is
memory.
flawed.
Interesting
The revised
terminology
cache
for
discovery
someone in
protocol
maintenance
designates
work.
this area for
Brinley's
immediate
response
retrieval.
came too quickly,
Phase 1
too
begins
smoothly.
Did you see
Physical
that smoke?
therapy education,
Is the
sir.
ACE system active
After the
yet?
accident, I
Almost
had to
there.
learn
Look at
a
her
lot
go.
of medical
She
terms.
seems pleased.
Her voice carried the weight of truth mixed with careful omission, like precious metals dissolved in solutions
All units,
designed to
this is
hide their
command.
actual
We have a
value.
confirmed breach at
Colt
Sector
moved
Gamma.
closer, drawn by the scent of vulnerability like a predator following blood trails. His massive frame cast shadows that seemed to swallow the fluorescent lighting, creating pools of darkness that made the eye
really
patch
her?
blend seamlessly with the surrounding gloom.
The one they call ACE.
What kind of accident?
Looks
He
like it.
demanded, his voice carrying the kind of aggressive curiosity that belonged in interrogation rooms rather
never
than
seen
routine
anything
maintenance
like it.
supervision.
He didn't
Car
stand
crash,
a chance.
industrial equipment, or
Should we
maybe
move
you
him
were
yet?
just born defective.
Not until she's
The words
finished.
landed like physical blows, each one designed to
looks
find
rough.
weak points in whatever psychological armor
Nightingale is
Brinley
down.
had constructed
Repeat,
around her
Nightingale is down.
disability. But instead of
really
the expected
necessary?
flinch or defensive response,
He's
she
baiting
did
her.
something that caught all three men off guard. She straightened, not dramatically, not in any way that could be interpreted as defiance or challenge, just a subtle adjustment of posture that somehow transformed her from a
Seismic
broken
activity
cleaning
is
lady
increasing.
into something that carried
behind
hints of
cover. The
steel
door is
beneath the
compromised.
surface rust.
You thought you could
IED
undermine
blast,
me in
sir,
my own command
she
center.
said quietly,
That insignia
her voice
means
carrying
nothing here,
undertones
Commander.
that belonged to
This is
people
an
who'd seen
ACE
things that
operation
existed
now.
beyond the reach of civilian imagination. Improvised explosive device, Afghanistan Theater, 2021. The admission hit the hallway
cleared that
like
fast.
electricity, charging the atmosphere with implications that belonged
Yeah,
in
Ace is
classified
always
briefing
efficient.
rooms, rather than routine personnel
Medevac, this is
interactions.
Viper Actual.
3 elite
Priority
warriors
1
found
transport
themselves staring
inbound.
at a
I
disabled
repeat,
civilian
clear the
who
landing
just
zone
claimed
immediately.
experience in the
We are
kind
moving
of combat zones
These
that
nodes are
define the outer
compromised.
limits of
We
human
move at
endurance.
0600.
Nash's expression shifted from
actually did
casual
it.
interest to professional
I told you
assessment,
she would.
his mind automatically
Gage, male,
processing the
GSW to the left
implications of
chest. BP is 80
combat-related
over PALP.
injuries
He
and their
received 1 unit
potential
pack cells.
impact on
Attention
security
pneumo
clearance
suspected. Applying
requirements.
seal now.
In his world of compartmentalized information, Afghanistan veterans carried baggage that extended far beyond visible disabilities. Afghanistan, he repeated, the word carrying weight that seemed disproportionate to its simple geography.
Just keep the channel secure.
Military
She's
service,
almost done.
contractor work, civilian relief operations. Brinley's answer came with the same careful precision that had characterized her earlier responses, delivered while resuming her cleaning with movements that
actually pulled it
suggested the
off.
conversation was secondary to more important activities. Civilian contractor, sir. Administrative support.
Look at that hair.
Wrong place
she's
at the wrong
invincible.
time. She dipped
We'll
her
see how
mop in
long
the
that
bucket with
lasts.
mechanical efficiency. Nothing exciting, just paperwork that needed filing in dangerous places. The explanation should have been satisfactory,
How long do you give
reasonable,
her?
the kind of bureaucratic
5 minutes
accident
tops
that
before
explained
she
how
cracks.
civilian personnel ended
He's
up in
relentless.
combat zones where they had no
Keep
business
scrubbing.
being.
Maybe you'll earn your
But
keep.
something about her
Don't look up.
delivery
Just keep cleaning.
suggested depths of experience that couldn't be explained by filing paperwork in air-conditioned office
The
trailers.
incident was localized
Gage
within
found
the
himself
Omega sector,
studying the way
Commander.
she held
And the
the mop,
cause?
And the
noting
cause?
details
We
that
expect
didn't
a full
quite fit
report
the
by
narrative she was
0800.
constructing. The calloused pattern on her hands spoke of equipment familiarity that extended beyond cleaning supplies. The automatic awareness she maintained of their
Look at her checking
positions,
the names.
despite appearing to focus entirely on her work.
Wonder what
The
she's
controlled
really
breathing
looking
that
for.
belonged to people who'd learned to manage stress through
selector
conscious
switch is right
application
here.
of will.
Semi-automatic
Who is this
engagement
mysterious
only.
one-eyed
Look at her
woman
showing
that these
off.
elite SEALs are mocking? Hit
don't
that
trust her.
subscribe button
Did
right
she
now
really trigger
if you
the
think there's
ACE
way more to her
protocol?
story than meets the eye. Because the clues
Look at
are
her,
already
she's not even
dropping,
scared.
and what's coming next will shock you. The compound's main
As you can
corridor
see, the
stretched
ACE
before them
system
like a
handles the
canyon
primary
carved
encryption
from
across all
concrete and
bands.
steel,
The interface
lined with
simplifies the
photographs
frequency
that
hopping
told the
sequence.
story of
And the
American
field-
Your data
special
sheet indicates
operations
these plates
in
failed the
black and
kinetic
white
impact test,
certainties,
Lieutenant. Explain
heroes
yourself.
in
The
field
desert
tests show they perform
camouflage,
above standards,
medal
sir. The
ceremonies
data is
where
flawed.
presidents
The
shook
revised
hands with
cache
warriors
discovery
whose
protocol
names would
designates
never
this area
appear
for
in
immediate
newspapers.
retrieval.
Memorial
Phase 1
walls where
begins
golden
now.
stars marked the
Did you see
places
that
where
smirk?
legends used to
Is the
stand.
ACE system
Colt
active
forced
yet?
Brinley to
Almost
her feet
there.
with a
Look at her
grip
go.
that left
Seems
finger-shaped
pleased.
impressions on her upper arm. "Tell me something, Cyclops," he said, steering her toward the gallery of
All
military
units,
portraits.
this is command.
You
We have a
recognize any
confirmed
of
breach
these
at Sector
heroes?
Gamma.
Or are you too busy
Red.
feeling sorry for yourself to appreciate real sacrifice? The question landed like a physical blow, but Brinley absorbed it without flinching. She let Colt position her in front of a particular
Is that really her?
photograph. Operation Neptune Spear,
one they call
the Bin
Ace.
Laden raid,
Looks
captured
like it.
in that moment when history pivoted on the actions of
she?
23 warriors who'd trained their entire lives
Never
for
seen
18
anything
minutes
like
of
it.
perfect violence.
He didn't stand a chance.
That's what warriors look like, Colt continued,
Should we move him
his
yet?
voice gaining momentum like
Not
a
until
sermon
she's
building
finished.
toward salvation. Men who earned
looks
their
rough.
place through blood and sweat, and the
Nightingale
kind
is
of
down.
suffering you
Repeat,
couldn't
Nightingale is
imagine in
down.
your worst
Is that
nightmares.
really necessary?
His breath was hot against her ear,
He's baiting
carrying
her.
the metallic scent of gun oil and misplaced righteousness. Not broken civilians who got pity jobs because some bureaucrat needed to fill a diversity quota. But as Brinley studied the photograph, something shifted in her
Seismic
posture
activity is
that was so
increasing.
subtle it almost escaped
behind
notice.
cover. The door is
Her head
compromised.
tilted 3 degrees to the left,
You thought
the
you
same
could
angle
undermine
a
me in my
sniper
own
used when
command
accounting
center.
for wind
That
drift
insignia
at
means
800
nothing here,
meters.
Commander.
Her breathing
This is an
slowed to the rhythm of
ACE
someone who'd
operation
learned
now.
to control their heartbeat through conscious will. And her remaining eye moved across the tactical formation in the picture with the kind of professional assessment that belonged
cleared
to
that
someone
fast.
who understood small unit dynamics at an instinctive level.
Yeah, Ace
The
is
change
always
was
efficient.
minimal, almost imperceptible, but
Medevac,
Gage
this
caught
is
it.
Viper Actual.
Something about the way
Priority
she
1
analyzed the
transport inbound.
photograph
I
triggered
repeat,
memories
clear
that
the
lived in the
landing zone
protected
immediately. We
spaces
are
of his
moving now.
mind. Patterns of
These nodes
behavior
are
that belonged to
compromised.
very
We move at
specific training
0600.
programs and operational
She actually
experience.
did it.
Interesting formation,
I told you she
Brinley
would.
said quietly, her
Gage,
voice
male,
carrying no
GSW to the
particular
left
emphasis
chest.
but
BP
somehow
is 80
managing
over
to
Palp.
command
He received
attention.
1 unit pack cells.
4-man
Attention,
teams,
pneumo suspected,
overlapping
applying seal
fields
now.
of fire, sequential breach protocol. She paused, as if catching herself before saying too much. At least, that's what it looks like from the photograph.
He's here.
The tactical assessment hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, carrying with it implications
Just keep
that
the channel
belonged
secure.
in classified
She's almost
briefing
done.
rooms rather than civilian commentary on historical photographs. Nash stepped closer, his professional instincts activating like early warning systems
Look at her
designed to
go.
detect anomalies in routine
actually pulled it
interactions.
off.
Sequential breach protocol, he repeated, investing the phrase with enough weight to stop conversations 3
at that
buildings
hair.
away.
Think she's
Very
invincible.
specific terminology
We'll see
for
how long
someone
that
whose
lasts.
experience involves filing paperwork in administrative offices. Brinley's response came too quickly, too smoothly, like someone who had
How long
rehearsed
do you
this
give her?
conversation in front of mirrors.
5 minutes tops
Military
before she
documentaries,
cracks.
sir. History
He's
Channel
relentless.
programming, very
Keep scrubbing.
educational
Maybe you'll
about
earn your keep.
tactical
Don't look
procedures
up.
and
Just keep
historical
cleaning.
operations. It was another reasonable answer, another perfectly crafted
The
deflection.
incident was localized
But the
within the
clinical
Omega
precision
sector,
with which
Commander.
she'd analyzed the
KOS?
photograph
And the KOS?
suggested
We expect a
familiarity
full
that
report by
extended far
0800.
beyond casual television viewing. Colt moved to another section of the memorial wall, this one displaying equipment rather than personnel, weapon systems
Look
that
at
had
her checking
defined the
the names.
evolution of special operations tactics.
Wonder what
Communication
she's
gear
really
that had
looking for.
enabled coordination across impossible distances.
The selector switch is
Body
right here.
armor that had kept warriors
Semi-automatic
alive in
engagement
environments
only.
designed to
Look at
kill
her showing
everything
off.
human about human nature.
I don't trust
Let's try
her.
something a little
she
more
really
challenging,
trigger the
he
ACE
said,
protocol?
positioning Brinley in front of a display case containing
Look at
an
her, she's not
M4
even
carbine
scared.
mounted on ceremonial brackets. Basic weapon
As you can see, the
identification,
ACE system
military
handles the primary
nomenclature,
encryption
the
across
kind of
all bands.
information that any
The interface
civilian might
simplifies the
pick up from
frequency hopping
action
sequence.
movies or
And the
video
Your data
games.
sheet indicates
The
these
rifle
plates
seemed to
failed the
command
kinetic
attention in
impact
ways
test,
that
Lieutenant.
transcended
Explain
its
yourself.
physical
Field tests
presence,
show they performed
drawing
above
the eye
standards,
with the
sir.
kind of
The data is
magnetic
flawed.
attraction that
The
belonged
revised
to
cache
objects
discovery
designed
protocol
for very
designates this
specific
area for
purposes.
immediate retrieval.
In the right
Phase
hands,
1
it represented
begins
the
now.
difference between mission
you see that
success
smirk?
and catastrophic
ACE
failure.
system active
In the
yet?
wrong hands,
Almost
it was
there.
just
Look at
an
her go.
expensive
He seems
paperweight.
pleased.
Brinley's assessment was immediate and comprehensive, delivered without hesitation or the kind of uncertain
All units,
speculation
this is
that
command.
belonged
We
to
have a
people
confirmed
guessing
breach
about
at Sector
unfamiliar
Gamma.
equipment.
Condition red.
M4 carbine, 5.56 millimeter NATO round, effective range 500 meters for point targets, 800 meters for area targets.
Is that really her?
Cyclic rate of fire, 750
The one they call
rounds per
Ace.
minute. The technical
Looks like it.
specifications flowed from her like water from a broken
Who is
dam.
she?
Each detail delivered with the kind of automatic
I've never
precision
seen anything
that
like
belonged
it.
to people who'd been
He didn't
tested on
stand a
this
chance.
information under circumstances where
we
failure
move him
carried
yet?
consequences
Not until
beyond
she's
academic
finished.
disappointment. Nash found himself
He looks
studying her
rough.
response with the expression of someone who
Nightingale
just
is down.
watched physics
Repeat, Nightingale is
behave in
down.
ways that violated
really
fundamental
necessary?
laws. The technical accuracy was
baiting her.
impressive enough, but it was the casual confidence with which she delivered the information that transformed routine civilian interaction into something approaching professional recognition. Cyclic rate of fire,
Seismic
he
activity
observed,
is
his voice
increasing.
carrying undertones
Get
that
behind
suggested
cover. The door is
professional
compromised.
curiosity rather than
You thought
casual
you could undermine me
conversation.
in my own
Very
command
specific
center.
technical
That insignia means
specification.
nothing here,
Not the kind of
Commander.
information
This is an
typically
ACE
covered in
operation
History
now.
Channel documentaries. The observation hung between them like electricity, charging the atmosphere with implications that belonged in classified personnel evaluations rather than routine maintenance supervision. But Brinley absorbed the
Yeah,
implied
Ace is always
question
efficient.
without visible reaction. Her remaining
Medevac,
eye
this is
focused on the
Viper
weapon
Actual.
display, with the
Priority
kind
one,
of
transport
professional
inbound.
assessment
I
that
repeat,
belonged to
clear the
people who
landing zone
understood the
immediately.
difference
We are
between
moving
equipment and tools.
These nodes are
Internet
compromised.
research, sir,
We move at
she said,
0600.
her voice maintaining the same careful
actually did it.
neutrality that had characterized
I
all
told
her
you she would.
responses.
Gauge,
Wikipedia
mail,
entries,
GSW to the left
technical
chest.
manuals
BP is 80
available
over PAL.
through
He
public
received
domain
1 unit pack
sources,
cells.
very
Tension pneumo
comprehensive
suspected, applying
information
seal now.
about military equipment specifications. But something about the way she maintained eye contact while delivering the explanation suggested depths of experience
He's here.
that couldn't be explained by recreational reading about military hardware. The technical precision of her
channel
weapon
secure.
assessment
She's almost
belonged
done.
to people who had learned these specifications through hands-on experience in environments where theoretical knowledge had to be converted into practical application
Look at her
under
go.
life and death pressure.
She
Gage
actually
moved to
pulled it
stand
off.
beside the weapon display, his eyes alternating between the mounted rifle and the woman who'd just demonstrated
at that
familiarity
hair.
that extended
Think she's
far
invincible.
beyond civilian
We'll
curiosity
see how
about
long that
military
lasts.
equipment. There was something about her response pattern that triggered recognition, like hearing a familiar song played in a different key. Public domain
How long
technical
do you give her?
manuals, he said, but his voice
5
carried
minutes
less
tops
conviction
before
than
she
his words
cracks.
suggested. Interesting hobby
relentless.
for someone in maintenance work.
Keep scrubbing.
Most
Maybe you'll
people
earn your
prefer
keep.
recreational
Don't look up,
reading
just
that
keep cleaning.
doesn't involve ballistics calculations and weapon specifications. The comment
The
should have been
incident was
casual,
localized within the Omega
conversational,
sector,
the
Commander.
kind of
the
observation
cause?
that belonged in
The cause?
normal human
We expect a full
interaction
report
rather
by
than
0800.
professional interrogation. But there was something about Gage's tone that suggested he was following logical threads toward conclusions that belonged in classified personnel files
Look at her
rather
checking
than
the names.
routine security assessments. Brinley's response
Wonder what
maintained the
she's really
same
looking
careful
for.
balance between cooperation and deflection
The
that had
selector switch is right
characterized her
here.
entire interaction with the
Semi-automatic
three
engagement
men.
only.
When you
Look at her
spend most
showing
of your
off.
time alone, she said quietly,
trust her.
you develop
She really
unusual
triggered the
interests.
ACE protocol.
Military history helps me understand what happened
Look
to
at
me,
her, she's not even
why I
scared.
lost my eye, what it cost other people who served in
As you can
similar
see, the ACE
circumstances.
system handles the
The
primary
explanation
encryption across
carried
all
emotional
bands.
weight
The
that
interface
belonged to
simplifies
people
the frequency
processing
hopping
trauma
sequence.
through
Your
intellectual
data sheet
understanding,
indicates
the
these
kind of
plates failed the
psychological
kinetic impact
adaptation
test,
that
Lieutenant.
helped
Explain
survivors
yourself.
make
field
sense of
tests show they perform
experiences
above
that
standard,
existed
sir.
beyond
The
the
data
reach
is
of
flawed.
normal human
The revised
resilience.
cache discovery
But it was
protocol
delivered with
designates this
clinical
area for
detachment
immediate
that
retrieval.
suggested professional
Phase 1
distance
begins now.
rather than personal
Did you see
involvement.
that smirk?
Nash consulted his
ACE
security
system active
tablet,
yet?
fingers
Almost
dancing
there. Look
across
at her go.
classified
He seems
databases,
pleased.
with the kind of access that required monthly polygraph examinations and loyalty oaths sworn on
All
family
units,
graves.
this is command. We have a
Personnel
confirmed
files
breach at
scrolled
Sector
past
Gamma.
with mechanical precision, each one documenting the digital footprints that modern humans left, like breadcrumbs through the forest of bureaucratic surveillance. Brinley Knox, you go, bro.
Is that really
He
her?
read aloud, his voice carrying the weight of official
one they call
investigation. Age
Looks like
27, hired 18 months ago through
is
Henderson
she?
Cleaning Services. Previous employment includes
never seen
retail,
anything like
food
it.
service, and
didn't
various
stand a
administrative
chance.
positions. He paused,
Should we
scrolling
move him
through
yet?
additional records with
Not
increasing
until
interest.
she's finished.
No military service listed.
He looks
no
rough.
family members in the armed forces.
Nightingale is
No
down.
explanation
Repeat,
for
Nightingale is down.
familiarity with weapon
Is that really
specifications
necessary?
or tactical terminology.
He's baiting
The
her.
digital summary painted a picture of civilian ordinariness, the kind of unremarkable background that belonged to people who moved through life without leaving significant impressions on institutional memory. But the contrast between
Seismic
documented
activity is
history
increasing.
and demonstrated knowledge
behind
created
cover. The door
cognitive
is
dissonance
compromised.
that made professional
You
suspicion
thought you could
inevitable.
undermine me in my own
Brinley
command
resumed
center.
her cleaning with
That
mechanical
insignia means
precision,
nothing here,
each
Commander.
movement
This
economical
is an
and
ACE
purposeful.
operation now.
But Nash found himself studying the rhythm of her work, noting details that didn't quite fit the narrative constructed by her personnel file. The way she positioned herself to maintain
cleared that
visual
fast.
contact with all three men, while appearing to focus entirely
Yeah,
on
Ace
the
is
floor.
always efficient.
The automatic assessment of distances and
Medevac,
angles
this is
that
Viper
belong to
Actual.
people who
Priority
learned to
one,
stay
transport
alive through
inbound. I
situational
repeat,
awareness
clear the
rather
landing
than
zone
luck
immediately.
or hope.
We are moving now.
18 months,
These
Nash
nodes are
repeated,
compromised.
as if
We
the
move
number
at
contained some
0600.
hidden significance that only he could
actually did it.
decode. 18 months of
I told
access
you
to
she would.
classified facilities
Gauge,
during
mail,
operational
GSW to
periods.
the left chest.
18
BP is
months of
80 over
observing
PAL. He
personnel
received 1 unit
movements,
pack cells.
equipment
Tension pneumo
configurations,
suspected, applying
security
seal now.
procedures. His voice gained momentum like a prosecutor building toward inevitable conviction. 18 months of opportunity. The accusation hit the corridor like electricity, transforming routine personnel interaction into something that belonged
Just
in
keep the
federal
channel secure.
investigation
She's
rooms
almost done.
rather than maintenance supervision. Colt straightened to his full height, suddenly understanding that this had moved beyond casual harassment into territory that required
her
professional
go.
attention.
She
But Gage
actually
found
pulled it
himself
off.
studying Brinley's reaction with the intensity of someone trying to solve puzzles whose solutions carried personal
Look at that hair.
significance.
Thinks she's
There
invincible.
was something about her stillness
see how
that
long that
reminded him of
lasts.
snipers waiting for the perfect shot, the kind of controlled patience that belonged to people who understood that premature action meant mission failure.
How long do you
The
give her?
compound's emergency lighting system
5 minutes
chose that
tops
moment to
before she
malfunction, plunging the corridor into
relentless.
darkness for exactly 10
Keep
seconds
scrubbing. Maybe
before
you'll earn your
backup power
keep.
engaged
Don't look
and
up.
restored
Just keep praying.
illumination to emergency levels. 10 seconds of complete blackout in a facility
The
where
incident
10
was
seconds
localized
could mean
within
the
the Omega
difference
sector,
between
Commander.
operational
And the cause?
security
And the cause?
and catastrophic
We expect a full
compromise.
report by 0800.
But when the lights returned, Brinley was exactly where she'd been when darkness fell, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. Most people would have shown some reaction to
Look at her
sudden
checking the
darkness in an
names.
unfamiliar environment. Disorientation,
Wonder what she's
concern,
really looking for.
the kind of natural human response that belonged
The
to
selector
civilians
switch is
who
right
hadn't
here.
learned to function in conditions
Semi-automatic
where
engagement
visibility
only.
was a luxury
Look at her
rather
showing
than a
off.
necessity. Interesting,
I don't
Gage
trust her.
observed, his
She
voice
really
carrying
triggered the
undertones that
ACE
hadn't been there
protocol.
before. Most people react to unexpected
her, she's
blackouts,
not even scared.
natural startle response, unconscious
As you can see,
movement
the
toward
ACE system
familiar
handles the
reference
primary
pins.
encryption
He
across
studied
all
her
bands.
with renewed
The interface
intensity.
simplifies the
You didn't
frequency
move
hopping
at all.
sequence.
And
The
the failure
observation
data
hung
sheet
in the air
indicates
like
these
smoke
plates
from a
failed the
discharged
kinetic
weapon,
impact test, Lieutenant.
carrying
Explain
implications
yourself.
that
The field
belonged
tests
in
show that
classified
perform above
evaluation
standards, sir.
reports
The data is
rather than
flawed.
casual
The revised
conversation.
cache discovery
But
protocol
Brinley
designates
absorbed the
this area
comment
for
without
immediate
visible
retrieval.
reaction.
Phase
Her
one
remaining
begins
eye
now.
focused on resuming her
you see that
cleaning
smirk?
with the same
Is the
methodical
ACE system
efficiency
active yet?
that had
Almost
characterized
there.
her
Look at her
work
go.
before the lighting
Seems
malfunction.
pleased.
Depth perception issues, she explained, her voice carrying the flat precision of
All
someone
units,
reciting
this is
medical
command. We have a
terminology.
confirmed breach at
Monocular
Sector Gamma.
vision means I can't
Condition
judge
red.
distances accurately in changing light conditions. Safer to remain stationary until visual reference points stabilize. It was a reasonable explanation, clinically
really her?
accurate, and delivered with the kind of medical
The one they
authority
call
that
ACE.
belonged to people who'd spent
Looks like
months
it.
learning to adapt to significant physical limitations.
she?
But something about the controlled way she'd maintained
never seen
position during
anything like
complete
it.
darkness suggested
stand a
experience
chance.
that extended beyond adaptive mechanisms
Should we move him
learned through
yet?
physical therapy.
Not until she's
Advanced
finished.
biometric monitoring systems track vital
He looks
signs
rough.
and stress indicators for military personnel
Nightingale is down.
in
Repeat,
extreme
Nightingale is
operational
down.
conditions worldwide.
really necessary?
Nash moved closer to the memorial wall,
He's baiting
his
her.
attention focusing on a particular section that displayed equipment rather than personnel photographs. Communication systems that had enabled coordination across impossible distances. Surveillance gear that had
Seismic
transformed
activity is
intelligence
increasing.
gathering from art to
behind
science.
cover. The door is
Electronic
compromised.
warfare devices that had
thought you
redefined the
could undermine me
relationship
in my own
between
command
technology
center.
and
That
tactical
insignia means
advantage.
nothing here,
Let's
Commander.
try something a little
This is
more
an
technical,
ACE
he
operation
said,
now.
positioning himself beside a display case containing communication equipment that represented the current state of battlefield coordination technology. Radio
cleared that
systems,
fast.
frequency management, the kind of specialized knowledge that
Yeah, ACE
requires
is always
hands-on
efficient.
training rather than theoretical study.
Medevac, this is
The
Viper
equipment in
Actual.
the display
Priority
case
one,
looked
transport
deceptively
inbound.
simple, like
I repeat,
expensive
clear the
consumer
landing zone
electronics
immediately. We
rather
are
than
moving now.
military-grade communication
These nodes are
systems
compromised. We
capable
move
of
at
maintaining
0600.
contact across continental distances
actually did it.
while operating under electronic
you she
warfare
would.
conditions
Gauge,
that would
male,
disable
GSW
civilian
to the
equipment
left chest.
within
BP
minutes.
is 80 over
But as
PAL.
Brinley's
He received
gaze
one
fell on
unit
the
pack cells.
communication gear,
Attention pneumo suspected,
something
applying
shifted in
seal
her
now.
expression that was so subtle it almost escaped notice. Her remaining eye focused with the kind of professional interest that belonged to people who understood the
He's here.
technical specifications behind the impressive visual presentation. Harris Falcon III
Just keep the
multiband
channel
radio,
secure.
she
She's
said
almost done.
quietly, her voice carrying no particular emphasis but somehow managing to command attention. Software-defined architecture, frequency hopping anti-jam
Look at her go.
capabilities. Effective
She
range
actually
varies
pulled it
based
off.
on atmospheric conditions and terrain masking. The technical assessment flowed from her with the same casual
Look at that
precision
hair.
that had
Thinks she's
characterized her
invincible.
earlier weapon identification.
how long that
Each
lasts.
specification delivered as if she were reading from memory rather than speculating about unfamiliar equipment. Nash stared at her with the expression of someone
How long
who'd
do you
just
give her?
discovered that his carefully
5 minutes
ordered
tops
world
before she
contained
cracks.
variables he'd never
He's
learned to
relentless.
calculate. Harris Falcon
Keep scrubbing.
III
Maybe you'll earn your
radios were
keep.
classified
Don't look up.
equipment,
Just keep
their
cleaning.
technical specifications protected by export controls and distribution limitations
The
that
incident was
restricted
localized
detailed
within the Omega
information to
sector,
personnel
Commander.
with
And the
appropriate
cause?
security
And the cause?
clearances.
We expect a full report by
Software-defined
0800.
architecture, he repeated, investing the phrase with enough weight to stop conversations in adjacent counties. Very specific technical terminology, not the kind of information
her checking
available
the
through
names.
Wikipedia entries or History Channel
Wonder what she's
documentaries.
really looking for.
The observation transformed the corridor from a place
The
of
selector
routine
switch is right
personnel
here.
interaction into
Semi-automatic
something that
engagement
belonged in
only.
classified
Look at her
security
showing off.
evaluations, complete with the
I don't
weight of
trust her.
professional
she
suspicion
really trigger
and the
the
promise of
ACE protocol?
investigations that could reshape entire careers through
Look at her,
bureaucratic
she's not even
momentum.
scared.
But Brinley maintained her expression of confused innocence,
As you can see, the
as if
ACE
the
system
technical
handles the
knowledge had
primary
emerged from
encryption
some
across all
unconscious
bands.
reservoir
The
of
interface
information,
simplifies the frequency
rather
hopping
than
sequence.
deliberate study
And the
of
field-
Your
classified
data sheet indicates
communication
these
systems.
plates failed the kinetic impact
Technical
test,
forums,
Lieutenant.
she
Explain
said,
yourself.
The field
her
tests
voice
show they
carrying
perform
the
above
same
standards,
careful
sir. The
neutrality
data is
that had
flawed.
characterized
The
all her
revised cache
responses.
discovery protocol
Online
designates this
discussion
area
groups
for
for
immediate
radio
retrieval.
enthusiasts,
Phase 1 begins
ham
now.
radio operators
Did you
who
see that
discuss
smirk?
military equipment
ACE system
specifications.
active yet?
She paused as if
Almost there.
searching
Look at
for
her go.
additional
He
explanation.
seems pleased.
Surprising how much classified information becomes available through amateur radio communities. The explanation
units,
should have
this
been
is command.
sufficient,
We have a confirmed
reasonable,
breach at Sector
the kind of
Gamma.
information leakage that belonged in security briefings about operational security failures and the unintended consequences of enthusiast communities with too much technical curiosity. But something
really
about the
her?
way she delivered the information suggested
one they call
familiarity
Ace.
that couldn't be explained by
like it.
casual participation in hobbyist forums.
Who is she?
Colt moved to another section of the memorial display,
Never
this
seen
one
anything
containing
like it.
tactical gear that had
He didn't
defined
stand a
the evolution
chance.
of personal protection systems.
Should we move
Body
him yet?
armor that had kept warriors
Not until
alive
she's
in
finished.
environments designed to kill everything human
He
about
looks
human
rough.
nature. Helmets equipped with night
Nightingale
vision
is down.
systems
Repeat,
that
Nightingale
transform
is down.
darkness from tactical
Is that really
disadvantage
necessary?
to operational advantage.
He's baiting
Load-bearing
her.
equipment that distributed the weight of survival across human frames that had been pushed beyond their design specifications. Personal protective equipment, he announced, gesturing toward the display with theatrical authority.
Seismic activity is
The kind of
increasing.
specialized gear that
Get behind
separates
cover. The door
professionals
is
from
compromised.
civilians who think they understand military operations. His voice carried
That
the kind of
insignia
aggressive
means nothing
confidence
here,
that
Commander.
belonged to people
This is
who'd
an
never
ACE
encountered genuine
operation now.
resistance. Let's see how much your internet research taught you about staying alive in combat zones. The tactical gear seemed to absorb the fluorescent lighting, its specialized coatings and advanced materials designed to deflect more than just ballistic
Yeah, Ace
threats.
is always efficient.
Each piece represented ththousands of hours of
Medevac,
research
this
and
is Viper
development,
Actual.
millions of
Priority one,
dollars in
transport
technological
inbound.
advancement,
I repeat,
and
clear
the
the landing zone
accumulated wisdom of
immediately. We are
warriors
moving now.
who'd learned to survive
These
through
nodes are
superior
compromised.
equipment
We move
rather
at
than
0600.
superior luck. But as
She actually
Brinley
did it.
studied the protective equipment,
I
her
told you she
assessment
would.
carried the same
Gauge,
professional
male,
precision
DFW to the
that had
left chest.
characterized
BP
her
is 80
earlier
over
technical
palp. He received 1 unit
evaluations,
pack cells.
delivered
Attention
without
memo suspected,
hesitation
applying
or
seal
the
now.
kind of uncertain speculation that belonged to people guessing about unfamiliar gear. Interceptor body armor system, she said, her voice maintaining the
He's
flat
here.
clinical tone that suggested stall. Suggested technical familiarity
Just keep the channel
rather
secure.
than casual observation.
She's almost done.
Kevlar and ceramic plate configuration, level 2A protection against small arms fire. Modular design allows for mission-specific threat assessment
Look at her
and
go.
equipment adaptation.
She
The
actually
technical
pulled it off.
specifications continued to flow from her like water from a broken dam. Each detail delivered with automatic precision
Look at that hair.
belonged to people who'd
Thinks
been
she's
tested on
invincible.
this information, under
see how long that
circumstances where
lasts.
theoretical knowledge had to be converted into practical application under life and death pressure. Gage found himself studying her equipment assessment
How
with
long do you
renewed
give her?
intensity, his tactical
5
mind
minutes tops
cataloging
before she
details that
cracks.
belonged in classified
He's
evaluation
relentless.
reports, rather than
Keep scrubbing.
routine
Maybe you'll
civilian
earn your keep.
commentary on
Don't
military
look up. Just
displays.
keep cleaning.
There was something about her analysis that triggered recognition, like hearing familiar music
The
played
incident
by
was
someone who
localized within
understood
the
the
Omega
emotional
sector,
content
Commander.
behind
And the
the
cause?
technical
And the
execution.
cause?
We expect
Mission-specific
a full
threat
report by
assessment,
0800.
he observed, his voice carrying undertones that suggested professional curiosity rather than casual conversation. Interesting terminology for someone whose experience involves
Look at her
filing
checking the
paperwork
names.
in administrative offices. The comment hung
Wonder what
between
she's
them like
really looking
electricity,
for.
charging the atmosphere with implications
The
that
selector
belonged in
switch is right
classified
here.
personnel
Semi-automatic
evaluations
engagement
rather than
only.
routine security
Look at her showing off.
interactions. But Brinley absorbed the
I don't trust her.
observation
Did
without
she really
visible
trigger the
reaction.
ACE
Her
protocol?
remaining eye focused on the protective equipment with the kind of
her, she's not
professional
even scared.
assessment that belonged to people who understood the difference
As you
between
can see, the
theoretical
ACE system
protection
handles
and
the primary
practical
encryption
survival.
across all bands.
Risk
The
management
interface
training,
simplifies the
she
frequency hopping
explained,
sequence.
her voice
the fair-
carrying
Your
the
data
same
sheet
careful
indicates these
balance
plates
between
failed the kinetic
cooperation
impact
and
test,
deflection
Lieutenant. Explain
that had
yourself.
characterized her
tests show they
entire
perform above
interaction with
standards,
the
sir.
three men.
The data is flawed.
Civilian
The revised
contractor
cache discovery
orientation
protocol
programs,
designates this area
very
for
comprehensive
immediate retrieval.
education about
Phase
threat
1
assessment
begins
and
now.
personal protection in
see that
high-risk
smirk?
environments.
Is the ACE
The
system
explanation
active yet?
carried institutional
there.
weight
Look at her
that
go.
belonged to
She seems
bureaucratic
pleased.
training programs designed to prepare civilian personnel for deployment in environments where their survival
All units,
depended on
this is
understanding
command. We have a
military
confirmed breach
equipment
at
and
Sector Gamma.
procedures. But something about the clinical precision with which she'd assessed the protective gear suggested experience that extended beyond classroom instruction and theoretical study. Nash moved
that
closer
really
to the
her?
memorial display, his attention
one
focusing
they
on a
call
section
ACE.
that contained equipment
Looks like it.
photographs rather than actual hardware,
Who is
images
she?
of weapons systems deployed in classified operations,
I've never seen
communication
anything like it.
gear that had enabled
He didn't stand a
coordination during
chance.
missions whose existence was protected
Should we
by
move 'em yet?
congressional oversight and presidential
until she's
signatures.
finished.
Surveillance equipment that had gathered
looks
intelligence
rough.
in places where discovery meant
Nightingale is
death
down.
rather than
Repeat, Nightingale is
embarrassment.
down.
Operational photography, he announced, positioning
Waiting
Brinley
her.
in front of a particular image that showed tactical equipment in field conditions rather than sterile display cases. Real-world deployment, combat environment applications, the kind of contextual information that separates
activity is
theoretical knowledge
increasing.
from practical experience.
behind cover. The
The
door is
photograph displayed a
compromised.
weapons cache discovered
thought you
during
could
a
undermine me in my
counterterrorism
own command
operation.
center.
Each
That
piece of
insignia
equipment
means nothing
tagged and
here,
cataloged
Commander.
according to
This is an
procedures
ACE
that belonged in
operation now.
evidence rooms rather than combat zones. But the image also contained background details that provided tactical context about the operation itself. Information that belonged in classified after-action reports rather than public
Yeah,
memorial
ACE is always
displays.
efficient.
But as Brinley studied the operational
Medevac,
photograph,
this is Viper
her analysis
Actual.
carried
Priority
implications
one
that
transport
transformed
inbound.
routine
I
memorial
repeat, clear
viewing
the landing
into
zone
something
immediately.
approaching
We are moving
professional
now.
debriefing, delivered
These
with
nodes are
technical
compromised.
precision
We
that
move at
belonged to people who
0600.
understood the tactical significance
actually
of
did it.
equipment placement and
I
environmental
told you she
conditions.
would.
Cache
Mail,
discovery
GSW to the
protocol,
left chest.
she said
BP is 80
quietly,
over
her
Palp.
voice
He
carrying
received
no
one unit pack
particular
cells.
emphasis,
Attention
but
pneumo
somehow
suspected,
managing to
applying seal
command
now.
attention. Equipment separated according to threat assessment and forensic priority. Weapons staged for controlled demolition. Communication
He's
gear
here.
preserved for intelligence exploitation. She paused, as if catching herself before
Just keep the
revealing
channel
too
secure.
much technical knowledge.
She's almost done.
At least that's what the procedures would suggest. The tactical assessment hit the corridor like artillery fire, transforming routine civilian commentary into something
her
that
go.
belonged in classified operational
actually pulled it
briefings,
off.
where the analysis carried implications for future mission planning and tactical development. Nash stared at
Look
her
at that hair.
with the expression of someone
she's
who just
invincible.
discovered that his
We'll see
carefully
how long
ordered
that
world
lasts.
contained operations that existed beyond the reach of conventional understanding. His professional mind struggling to process implications that belonged in
How long do
briefing
you give
rooms
her?
he'd never seen and would
5
never be
minutes
cleared
tops
to enter.
before she cracks.
Cache discovery
He's
protocol,
relentless.
he repeated, the
Keep
phrase
scrubbing.
carrying
Maybe you'll
weight
earn your
that seemed
keep.
disproportionate
Don't look up.
to its
Just keep
technical
cleaning.
meaning, like a stone dropped into still water that created ripples extending far
The
beyond its
incident was
apparent
localized
impact.
within the Omega
Very
sector,
specific
Commander.
procedural
And the cause?
terminology,
And the
not
cause?
the kind of
expect
information
a full
available
report by
through civilian
0800.
contractor orientation programs. The observation transformed the memorial corridor from a place of routine personnel interaction into something that belonged in classified
checking the
security
names.
evaluations, complete with the weight of professional
Wonder what she's
recognition
really
and the
looking
promise
for.
of investigations that could reshape entire
The
command
selector switch is
structures
right here.
through bureaucratic
Semi-automatic
momentum.
engagement
But before
only.
Brinley could offer
Look at her
another
showing
carefully
off.
crafted deflection, the compound's
trust
public
her.
address system
really trigger
activated
the
with
ACE
electronic
protocol?
authority that belonged in crisis management scenarios
she's not
rather
even
than
scared.
routine operational announcements. Attention all
As you can see,
personnel,
the ACE
the synthetic
system handles
voice
the
declared,
primary encryption
filling the
across all
corridor
bands.
with official
The
weight
interface simplifies
that
the
transformed
frequency hopping
casual
sequence.
conversation
And the fail-
Your data
into
sheet
mandatory
indicates these
compliance
plates
with
failed the
security
kinetic impact test,
protocols.
Lieutenant. Explain
Facility-wide
Field tests show
security
they perform
assessment in
above standards,
progress.
sir. The data
All
is
non-essential
flawed.
personnel
revised
report to
cache
designated
discovery
assembly
protocol
areas
designates
for
this area for
verification
immediate retrieval.
procedures.
Phase
The
one
announcement hit the
begins now.
corridor like a physical
Did you see
force,
that smirk?
transforming
Is the
routine
ACE
personnel
system active
interaction
yet?
into
Almost
something
there.
that
Look at her
belonged
go.
in emergency
She seems
response
pleased.
scenarios where individual preferences became subordinate to institutional security requirements.
All units, this
Nash
is command.
consulted
We
his
have a
security
confirmed breach at
tablet
Sector
with
Gamma.
renewed urgency,
Condiff
his
red.
fingers dancing across classified databases with the kind of access that required congressional oversight just to view the login screens. But instead of the routine personnel
really
verification
her?
he'd expected to find, the information
they call
displayed on
ACE.
his device suggested
like it.
something far more complex than standard
Who is
security
she?
assessment. Interesting timing, he observed,
never
his
seen
voice
anything
carrying
like it.
undertones that belonged in
didn't stand a
classified
chance.
evaluation sessions, rather than casual
move him yet?
conversation.
Not
Facility-wide
until she's
security
finished.
assessment, comprehensive personnel
looks
verification,
rough.
the kind of thorough
Nightingale
investigation
is
that's
down.
typically
Repeat, Nightingale is
reserved
down.
for specific threat
Is that really
scenarios.
necessary?
The implications transform the
paying her.
atmosphere in the corridor from routine personnel supervision to something approaching operational crisis management, complete with the weight of institutional response and the promise of consequences that could reshape entire
Seismic activity
careers
is
through
increasing.
administrative momentum.
Get
But as
behind
Nash
cover. The door
continued
is
to scroll
compromised.
through classified information
You
on
thought
his
you could
tablet,
undermine me in my
searching
own
for
command
explanations
center.
that could
That
account for the
insignia
sudden
means nothing
escalation
here,
in security
Commander.
procedures,
This is an
Brinley
ACE
did something
operation
that
now.
changed the fundamental nature of their interaction, from routine personnel management to something approaching professional recognition. She began to hum.
She
The
cleared
melody
that
was
fast.
soft, barely audible above the electronic noise of security
ACE is
systems
always
and
efficient.
ventilation equipment, but it carried with it the
Medevac,
weight of
this is Viper
familiarity
Actual.
that made Gage's
Priority one,
hands
transport
tremble like
inbound.
autumn leaves.
I repeat,
It was
clear the
something
landing
he'd
zone
heard before,
immediately. We are
in
moving
places
now.
where music meant the difference
These
between
nodes are
sanity
compromised.
and madness.
We move at 0600.
A tune that belonged to soldiers who'd learned to
actually
find
did it.
beauty in environments designed
I
to
told you she
destroy
would.
everything human about
Gage,
human
male,
nature.
GSW to the
That
left
song,
chest. BP
Gage
is 80 over
whispered,
Palp.
his voice
He received
breaking
one
like a
unit pack
teenager
cell.
discovering
Tension pneumo
that
suspected,
childhood
applying seal
certainties
now.
were more fragile than he had ever imagined. Where did you learn that song? Brinley's humming stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving silence that pressed against
He's
their
here.
eardrums like depth charges detonating in deep water. When she looked at Gage, her remaining
keep the
eye
channel
held
secure.
something that
She's
might have
almost
been
done.
recognition masked as confusion, like someone trying to remember dreams that live just beyond the reach of conscious memory. I don't know, she said, the words
at her
carrying the
go.
weight of truth that had been
She
buried
actually
under
pulled it
layers of
off.
necessity and pain. I don't remember learning it. It just comes to me sometimes, when I'm nervous, when I
Look at
need
that
something
hair.
familiar to hold
Think
on
she's
to.
invincible.
The admission transformed
We'll
the
see how long
corridor
that
into something
lasts.
that belonged in confessional booths rather than military installations, complete with the weight of emotional revelation and the promise of understanding
How long
that
do you give
extended
her?
beyond bureaucratic procedures
tops
and
before
security
she cracks.
protocols. But
He's
it was the way
relentless.
Gage responded to her explanation
scrubbing.
that
Maybe you'll
suggested
earn your
their
keep.
interaction
Don't
had
look
moved
up, just
beyond
keep
routine
cleaning.
personnel assessment into territory that belonged in personal recognition rather
The
than
incident was
professional
localized within the
evaluation.
Omega sector.
Kandahar
Commander.
province,
KOS?
he said
And the KOS?
quietly.
We
The
expect a
words
full report
carrying
by
geographical
0800.
weight that belonged to places where people learned the difference between survival and luck through lessons that left permanent impressions on everyone who lived through the instruction.
her
Operation
checking the
Nightfall,
names.
August 23rd, 2021.
Wonder
The
what
date
she's
hung in the
really
air
looking
like
for.
smoke from a distant fire, carrying with it implications that
switch is
belonged
right
in
here.
classified after-action
Semi-automatic
reports,
engagement
rather than
only.
casual conversation
showing off.
between strangers in maintenance corridors.
I don't trust her.
But as the
Did she really
geographical and
trigger the
temporal
ACE
references
protocol?
settled into the space between them, Brinley's expression
she's not
shifted in
even
ways
scared.
that suggested recognition rather than confusion,
As you
like
can
someone
see, the
finally
ACE system
understanding
handles the
puzzle
primary
pieces
encryption
that had been
across all
arranged
bands.
incorrectly
The
for
interface
months
simplifies
or
the
years.
frequency hopping sequence.
Nightfall,
And the
she
failure-
Your data
repeated.
sheet indicates
The word
these plates
carrying
failed the
undertones
kinetic
that belonged
impact
to
test,
people who
Lieutenant. Explain
understood
yourself.
operational
tests show they perform
designations
above
through
standards,
personal
sir. The data
experience
is
rather
flawed.
than
The
historical
revised
study.
cache discovery
That's not a
protocol
common reference
designates
point
this
for
area
civilian
for immediate
contractors
retrieval.
who filed
Phase one
paperwork in
begins
administrative
now.
offices.
Did you
The
see that
observation
smirk?
transformed
Is the
their
ACE
interaction
system
from
active
routine
yet?
personnel
Almost there.
assessment
Look at her go.
to something approaching
seems
mutual
pleased.
recognition, complete with the weight of shared experience and the promise of understanding that extended beyond the
All
boundaries
units,
of
this is
conventional
command. We have a
explanation.
confirmed breach at Sector Gamma.
Nash found himself studying the
red.
exchange between Gage and Brinley with the expression of someone who'd just discovered that his carefully controlled security assessment had stumbled into territory that belonged in classified
her?
debriefing sessions rather than
one
routine
they call
personnel
ACE.
management. Gentlemen,
like it.
he said, his voice carrying authority
Who
that
is
belonged
she?
to people who'd learned to terminate conversations
I've never
before they
seen
developed
anything like
beyond
it.
the reach of administrative
didn't stand a
control.
chance.
I think this assessment requires more
Should we move 'em
comprehensive
yet?
evaluation
Not
than
until
quarter
she's finished.
conversation can provide. The observation
looks
should have
rough.
ended their informal investigation,
Nightingale is
redirecting
down.
it
Repeat,
toward
Nightingale
official
is down.
channels and bureaucratic
really
procedures
necessary?
that could process anomalies through institutional
her.
mechanisms designed to handle personnel issues that extended beyond routine management capabilities. But as Nash moved toward the corridor's exit, expecting automatic compliance with his suggestion, Brinley did
Seismic
something that
activity is
transformed their
increasing.
understanding of the situation
behind
from
cover. The door is
personnel
compromised.
assessment to something approaching
You thought you could
operational
undermine me in
crisis
my own
management.
command center.
She didn't
That
move,
insignia
not in the
means nothing
dramatic
here,
way of
Commander.
someone making a
This is an
stand or
ACE
issuing a
operation
challenge.
now.
She simply remained where she was, like a tree that had grown roots too deep to be moved by anything less than explosive charges. Her posture suggested submission, but her stillness
cleared
carried
that fast.
undertones of immobility that belonged to mountains rather than maintenance
Yeah,
workers.
Ace is always
I prefer to
efficient.
finish my shift, she said,
Medevac,
voice
this
still
is Viper
small,
Actual.
but carrying a note of
Priority 1
quiet
transport
determination
inbound.
that hadn't
I
been there
repeat,
before.
clear the landing
I
zone
have
immediately.
responsibilities
We are
that need
moving now.
completion before morning
These nodes are
personnel arrive
compromised.
for duty.
We move at
The words
0600.
carried institutional weight that
actually
belonged to
did it.
people who understood the difference
I told
between
you she would.
individual preferences
Gauge,
and
male,
operational
GSW to the left
requirements,
chest. BP is 80
delivered
over
with the
palp.
kind of
He received
professional
1 unit pack
courtesy
cells.
that
Tension
suggested
pneumo
respect
suspected,
for
applying
chain of
seal now.
command principles rather than personal defiance. Colt's expression shifted from casual amusement to something approaching genuine confusion, as if his carefully constructed understanding of power dynamics had encountered variables that didn't fit his established
Just keep the channel
behavioral
secure.
models.
She's almost done.
Responsibilities? He repeated, investing the word with enough mockery to power small cities. What responsibilities? Mopping floors,
Look at her
emptying
go.
trash cans,
She
the
actually
kind of
pulled it
crucial
off.
national defense work that keeps America safe from the forces of uncleanliness? But something in Brinley's expression
that
stopped
hair.
his laughter
Think
before it
she's
could gain
invincible.
momentum, transforming
how
his
long that
amusement
lasts.
into something sharper and more focused. When she looked at him, her remaining eye held depths that belonged in war memorials rather than maintenance corridors.
How long do you
Someone
give her?
has to maintain the infrastructure
5
that
minutes
keeps
tops
classified
before she
operations functioning, she
He's
said
relentless.
quietly, her voice carrying
scrubbing.
weight that
Maybe you'll
seemed
earn your keep.
disproportionate to
Don't
its
look
simple
up. Just keep
content.
cleaning.
Someone has to ensure that the environment remains secure and functional for people who do
The incident was
important
localized
work.
within the
She
Omega sector,
paused,
Commander.
letting the
And the
implications
cause?
settle
And the
like
cause?
stones dropped
We
into
expect a
still
full
water.
report by
Someone has to
0800.
be invisible so that others can be visible. The words transformed the corridor from a place of routine personnel interaction into something that belonged in philosophical
at her,
discussions
checking the names.
about service and sacrifice, complete with the weight
Wonder
of
what she's
institutional
really looking
recognition
for.
and the promise of understanding that extended
The
beyond
selector switch is right
bureaucratic
here.
procedures.
Semi-automatic
But it was the way she
engagement
delivered
only.
the explanation
Look at her showing
that
off.
suggested depths of experience that couldn't
I don't
be
trust
accounted
her.
for through
Did she
routine
really trigger
maintenance
the
work
ACE
or
protocol?
civilian contractor assignments in administrative offices.
She's not even scared.
Nash consulted his security tablet with renewed intensity,
As you can see,
his
the
fingers
ACE
dancing
system
across
handles the primary
classified
encryption across
databases
all
with the
bands.
kind of
The
urgent
interface
precision
simplifies the
that
frequency
belonged to
hopping
people who
sequence.
just
And the
discovered
Your data
that
sheet
routine
indicates these
investigations
plates
had
failed the
uncovered
kinetic impact
information
test,
that
Lieutenant.
required
Explain yourself.
immediate
The field
attention
tests show they
from
perform
higher
above
levels of
standards,
command
sir.
authority.
The data is flawed.
Miss
The
Knox,
revised
he
cache
said,
discovery
his
protocol
voice carrying the
designates
weight
this
of
area for
official
immediate
inquiry,
retrieval.
mixed with
Phase
something that
1
might have
begins
been
now.
developing professional
Did you see that
respect.
smirk?
Your personnel
ACE
file
system
indicates
active
18
yet?
months of
Almost
employment,
there. Look at her
but your
go.
demonstrated
He seems
knowledge
pleased.
suggests familiarity with military operations that extends far beyond civilian contractor experience.
All units, this is
The
command.
observation
We have a
hung
confirmed
between them
breach at
like
Sector Gamma.
electricity, charging the
Just read.
atmosphere with implications that belonged in classified personnel evaluations rather than routine security assessments conducted in maintenance corridors during night shift operations.
Is that really
But
her?
before Brinley could offer another carefully
one they call
crafted
Ace.
deflection, the compound's
it.
emergency communication system activated
Who is
with the
she?
kind of electronic urgency that transformed routine
I've never
facility
seen anything like
operations
it.
into crisis
didn't
management
stand a
scenarios
chance.
where individual preferences became
Should we move him
subordinate
yet?
to institutional security
until she's
requirements. Security Alert Level 4,
looks
the
rough.
synthetic voice announced, filling the corridor
Nightingale
with
is down.
official
Repeat,
authority that
Nightingale is down.
redefined their casual
that really
conversation
necessary?
as potential operational interference
baiting
with
her.
classified emergency protocols. All personnel implement immediate lockdown procedures. Await further instructions from designated security personnel. The announcement transformed the
Seismic
atmosphere in the
activity is
corridor
increasing.
from routine personnel
behind cover. The
assessment
door is
to something
compromised.
belonging in actual
You
crisis
thought you could
management,
undermine me in my own
complete with the
command
weight
center.
of institutional
That insignia
emergency
means nothing
response
here, Commander.
and the promise
This
of
is an
consequences
ACE
that could affect
operation now.
multiple levels of command structure if the situation continued to develop beyond the reach of conventional security procedures. But as the lockdown protocols engaged
She
around
cleared
them,
that fast.
transforming the corridor from a place of routine interaction
Yeah,
into a
Ace is
controlled
always efficient.
environment designed to protect classified
Medevac,
assets
this
from
is Viper
unauthorized
Actual.
access or
Priority 1
hostile
transport
interference.
inbound.
The three men
repeat,
found
clear the
themselves
landing zone
studying Brinley's
immediately. We are
reaction
moving
with
now.
renewed intensity.
These nodes are
Most
compromised.
people would have
We
shown
move at
concern at the
0600.
announcement of facility-wide emergency
actually did it.
procedures. Questions about the nature
told
of
you
the
she
threat, anxiety
Gauge,
about
male,
personal
GSW
safety,
to the left chest.
the kind of
BP is
natural
80
human
over palp.
response
He
that
received
belonged
one
to
unit pack
civilians
cells.
who hadn't
Attention
learned to
pneumo
function in
suspected, applying seal
environments
now.
where emergency alerts meant immediate danger rather than bureaucratic inconvenience. But Branley absorbed the announcement without visible reaction, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady, her remaining eye focused on environmental assessment, with the kind
Just
of
keep the channel
automatic
secure.
precision that
She's
belonged
almost
to
done.
people who'd learned to evaluate tactical situations through professional training rather than civilian curiosity. Interesting response, Gage observed,
Look at
his
her
voice
go!
carrying undertones that
She actually
suggested
pulled it
professional
off.
recognition rather than casual observation. Most civilians react to emergency alerts with questions or
Look at that
concern,
hair.
natural
Thinks
stress
she's
responses, unconscious
We'll see how
movement
long that
toward
lasts.
perceived safety. The observation hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon, carrying implications that belonged in classified evaluation
How long do you
reports,
give her?
rather than casual commentary on
minutes
human
tops before
behavior
she
during
cracks.
crisis situations.
He's relentless.
But as Gage continued to
Keep scrubbing.
study
Maybe you'll
Brinley's
earn your
reaction
keep.
to the
Don't
emergency
look up. Just keep
protocols,
cleaning.
something in her expression triggered recognition that belonged to memories he'd been trying to
The
avoid
incident
for
was
the past
localized
2
within
years.
the Omega sector,
Something
Commander.
about her
the
controlled
KOS?
breathing,
And the KOS?
the automatic
We expect a full
environmental
report by
assessment, the
0800.
professional distance she maintained from emotional responses that could interfere with tactical evaluation. Phantom, he whispered, the word escaping before he could stop it,
Look at her
carrying with
checking
it
the names.
geographical and temporal weight that belonged to places
Wonder
where
what
people
she's
learned
really
the difference
looking
between
for.
legends and reality, through lessons that left
The
permanent
selector switch is right
impressions
here.
on everyone who survived the
Semi-automatic
instruction.
engagement only.
The call sign
her
hit the
showing
corridor
off.
like artillery fire,
I don't trust
transforming
her.
routine
Did she
personnel
really trigger the
assessment into
ACE
something that
protocol?
belonged in classified recognition scenarios
Look at her,
where the
she's not
stakes
even
involved
scared.
operational security rather than individual
As you can
careers
see,
or
the ACE
bureaucratic
system handles
procedures.
the primary
Brinley's
encryption across all
reaction was
bands.
immediate
The
and
interface
telling.
simplifies the
Her
frequency
remaining
hopping
eye
sequence.
snapped to focus
And the
on
failed-
Your data
Gage
sheet
with the kind of
indicates these
direct
plates failed the
attention
kinetic
that
impact
belonged to
test,
people who had
Lieutenant. Explain
heard their
yourself.
The field
operational
tests show they
designation,
perform above
called in
standards, sir.
environments
The
where
data is
recognition
flawed.
could mean
The
either
revised cache
salvation
discovery
or
protocol
destruction,
designates
depending
this
on
area
who was
for
doing the
immediate
calling.
retrieval.
For
Phase
3
1
seconds,
begins now.
nobody moved.
Did you see
Nobody
that smirk?
breathed.
Is the
weight of
ACE
the call
system
sign
active
pressed
yet?
against the
Almost
corridor
there. Look at her
walls like
go.
atmospheric
He seems
pressure
pleased.
before a storm, carrying with it implications that could reshape everything they thought they understood about
All
maintenance
units,
workers
this is
and
command. We
classified
have a
military
confirmed breach at Sector
installations.
Gamma.
Then Brinley's
red.
expression shifted back down to confused innocence, as if the moment of recognition had been imagination rather than reality, professional distance rather than personal connection.
really her?
"I'm sorry, sir," she said,
The one
her
they
voice
call
carrying
Ace.
the same careful
like
neutrality
it.
that had characterized all her responses.
Who is she?
"I don't understand what you mean. I'm just maintenance
I've never
staff
seen
trying to
anything
complete
like
my
it.
assigned
Didn't
responsibilities."
stand a chance.
But the denial came too late. The
we move
recognition
him
had
yet?
already happened. The call
until
sign had
she's
already been
finished.
spoken. And in the space between
He looks
Gage's
rough.
whispered "phantom" and Brinley's careful
Nightingale is down.
deflection,
Repeat,
the
Nightingale
fundamental
is down.
nature of their interaction
really
had
necessary?
transformed from routine personnel assessment
baiting her.
to something approaching operational reunion between people who'd shared experience that existed beyond the reach of conventional explanation. Specialized insurance coverage and financial planning services designed specifically for
activity is
high-risk
increasing.
military contractors
Get
and
behind
special
cover. The door is
operations
compromised.
personnel. Nash stepped
You thought
closer,
you could
his
undermine me
expression
in my own
cycling
command
through
center.
suspicion,
That insignia
calculation,
means nothing here,
and something
Commander.
that might have been
This is an
dawning
ACE
comprehension,
operation now.
as the implications of Gage's recognition began to reshape his understanding of the tactical situation they'd stumbled into through bureaucratic accident rather than deliberate
cleared that
investigation.
fast.
"Phantom," he repeated, investing the call sign
Yeah,
with
Ace is
official
always
weight
efficient.
that belonged in classified briefing rooms
Medevac,
rather than
this is
maintenance
Viper
corridor
Actual.
conversations.
Priority 1 transport inbound.
Operational
I repeat,
designation,
clear the landing zone
special
immediately.
operations
We are
call
moving now.
sign, the kind of
These nodes are
professional
compromised.
identification
We
that's
move at
reserved for very
0600.
specific classifications of
She actually
personnel.
did it.
The observation transformed
you
the
she would.
corridor from a place of
Gage,
routine
male,
personnel
GSW to the left
interaction
chest.
into
BP
something
is
that
80 over
belonged in
palp. He
classified
received 1 unit pack
recognition
cells.
scenarios,
Attention pneumo suspected,
complete with the
applying seal
weight of
now.
institutional acknowledgement and the promise of explanations that could affect multiple levels of command structure if they continued to develop beyond the reach of conventional
here.
security procedures. But as Nash moved closer to observe Brinley's reaction to the operational
the channel
call
secure.
sign, the
She's almost
compound's
done.
emergency communication system delivered information that changed the tactical situation from theoretical recognition to immediate crisis requiring rapid response
her
based
go!
on professional competence
She actually
rather
pulled
than
it off.
bureaucratic procedure. Security Alert Level 3, the electronic voice announced, filling the corridor with
Look at that
authority
hair.
that transformed
Thinks she's
routine
invincible.
emergency protocols
We'll
into
see how
combat
long that
readiness
lasts.
procedures designed to protect classified assets from organized hostile action. Perimeter breach confirmed. All personnel maintain current
How long do you give
positions
her?
until security clearance
5 minutes
verification
tops before she
complete.
cracks.
The announcement hit the corridor like a
relentless.
physical force, transforming
scrubbing. Maybe you'll
theoretical
earn your
discussion
keep.
about
Don't look up,
operational
just keep
call
cleaning.
signs into immediate tactical reality, where decisions made in the next few minutes could determine
incident
whether
was
classified
localized within the
information
Omega
remained
sector,
secure
And the
or
cause?
fell into
And the
hands
cause?
that belonged to
We expect a full
organizations
report by
whose interests
0800.
extended far beyond American national security. But as the tactical situation continued to develop around them, the woman they'd known as maintenance worker, Brinley
Look at her
Knox,
checking the
finally
names.
began to reveal glimpses of who she really was and
Wonder
what her
what she's
presence at
really
the
looking
compound
for.
meant in terms of operational security and
The selector
institutional
switch is right
protection.
here.
Her posture straightened.
Semi-automatic
Her
engagement
breathing
only.
shifted to tactical
Look at her
rhythm.
showing
Her
off.
remaining eye began to assess the
I don't
corridor
trust her.
with the kind of
Did she
professional
really trigger the
precision
ACE
that belonged to
protocol?
people who'd learned to evaluate combat environments
her,
through
she's not even
experience,
scared.
gained in places where situational awareness meant the
As you can
difference
see, the
between
ACE
mission
system handles
success
the
and
primary
catastrophic
encryption across
failure.
all bands.
And for the first
The
time
interface
since their
simplifies the
interaction
frequency hopping
began,
sequence.
And the
Colt,
fail-
Your data
Nash,
sheet
and
indicates
Gage
these
found
plates failed the
themselves looking
kinetic
at
impact
someone
test,
who
Lieutenant.
carried
Explain
authority
yourself.
that belonged to
Field tests show they
warriors
perform
rather
above
than
standard,
maintenance
sir.
workers.
The data is
Capability that
The
extended
revised
far
cache
beyond
discovery
civilian
protocol
contractor
designates this area for
experience
immediate
and
retrieval.
purpose that
Phase
connected to
one
missions
begins
they'd
now.
never been cleared to
Did you see that
understand.
smirk?
The
Is the
lockdown
ACE
protocols
system active
continued
yet?
to engage
Almost
around
there.
them,
Look at her go.
transforming
He
familiar
seems pleased.
corridors into controlled environments designed to protect classified operations from unauthorized
All
access
units,
or
this is
hostile
command. We have a
interference.
confirmed breach
But
at
the
Sector
real
Gamma.
transformation was happening in their understanding of the woman who'd been cleaning floors and emptying trash cans, while they'd been treating her as a security risk, rather than recognizing her as potentially the most
really
dangerous
her?
person in the compound.
The one they call
Gentlemen,
Ace.
Brinley said quietly,
Looks like it.
her voice carrying authority that belonged to people
is
who'd
she?
learned to command in situations where hesitation meant
Never
mission
seen
failure
anything like it.
and indecision meant
didn't stand a
consequences
chance.
that extended far beyond individual
Should we
survival.
move him yet?
I suggest we find
until
somewhere
she's
more
finished.
secure to continue this conversation.
He looks
The
rough.
words transformed the corridor from a place of
Nightingale is
routine
down.
personnel
Repeat,
assessment
Nightingale is down.
into something that belonged
really
in tactical
necessary?
planning sessions where the stakes involved
baiting her.
operational security rather than bureaucratic procedures, and where the participants included people whose existence was protected by congressional oversight and presidential signatures. But as they prepared to follow her
Seismic
suggestion,
activity is
moving toward
increasing.
locations that could provide
behind
better
cover. The
security
door is
for
compromised.
conversations that belonged in
You thought you could
classified briefing
undermine me in
rooms
my own
rather than
command
maintenance
center.
corridors.
That
The
insignia
compound's
means nothing
emergency
here,
systems
Commander.
delivered one
This is an
final piece of
ACE
information
operation now.
that confirmed their situation had moved far beyond routine personnel management into territory that belonged in crisis response scenarios. Security alert
cleared
level
that
2,
fast.
hostile contact confirmed. All personnel prepare
Yeah,
for
Ace is
potential
always
defensive
efficient.
action. The announcement transformed
Medevac,
everything
this
they
is
thought
Viper
they
Actual.
understood
Priority
about
one,
routine
transport
facility
inbound.
security
I
into
repeat,
something
clear
that
the landing
belonged in
zone
combat
immediately.
zones,
We are moving now.
complete with the weight of immediate
nodes are
threat
compromised.
and the
We
promise
move
of
at
violence that could
0600.
affect the outcome of classified
actually did it.
operations, currently developing
I told you
beyond
she
the
would.
compound's defensive
Gage,
perimeter.
male,
And
GSW
in that
to the left
moment,
chest.
as
BP is
emergency
80 over
protocols
palp. He received
activated
1 unit
around
pack
them
cells.
and hostile
Attention pneumo
forces
suspected,
moved closer
applying
to
seal
their
now.
position, the 3 elite warriors finally began to understand that the disabled cleaning lady they'd been mocking for the past hour might be the only person in the
He's here.
compound capable of keeping them alive through whatever was coming next. The security
Just keep the
doors
channel
sealed
secure.
with mechanical
She's almost done.
finality, transforming the corridor from a place of routine interaction into a fortified position designed to withstand assault by hostile forces, equipped with
Look at her
military-grade
go!
weapons and professional
actually
tactical
pulled it
training.
off.
Emergency lighting cast everything in shades of red that belonged in submarine movies, creating an atmosphere
that
that
hair.
felt more like a
Thinks she's
combat zone
invincible.
than a civilian workplace.
see how long that
Nash's
lasts.
security tablet erupted with incoming data streams from sensors positioned throughout the compound's defensive perimeter. Multiple breach points, coordinated
give her?
movement patterns, equipment
5 minutes
signatures
tops
that
before she
suggested
cracks.
hostile forces with access to
relentless.
technology that belonged in national
scrubbing.
military
Maybe you'll earn your
inventories
keep.
rather
Don't
than
look up,
terrorist
just keep cleaning.
organizations or criminal enterprises. "This isn't random," he announced, his
The
voice
incident was
carrying the
localized
flat
within the
precision
Omega
of someone
sector,
who'd
Commander.
learned
And
to
the cause?
process crisis
And the cause?
information
We expect
without
a full
emotional
report by
interference.
0800.
Professional coordination, military-grade equipment, intelligence-driven target selection. He paused, consulting classified communication channels
Look at her,
that
checking
painted
the
an
names.
increasingly complex picture of the threat they were facing.
Wonder what she's
Someone
really
knew exactly
looking for.
when and how to hit us. The implications
selector
transformed the
switch is
sealed
right here.
corridor from a place of
Semi-automatic
routine
engagement
lockdown
only.
into something that
Look at her
belonged in
showing off.
crisis management scenarios where the stakes
trust her.
involved national
Did she really
security
trigger the
rather than
ACE
individual
protocol?
safety or bureaucratic procedures.
Look at her, she's
Colt
not even
moved
scared.
toward the emergency weapon locker with renewed purpose.
As you can see,
His
the
earlier
ACE system
amusement
handles the
replaced by the
primary
kind of
encryption
focused
across all
intensity
bands.
that
The interface
belonged to people
simplifies the
who
frequency hopping
understood that their
sequence.
survival
Your
might
data sheet
depend on
indicates
superior
these plates failed the
firepower
kinetic
applied
impact
with
test,
tactical
Lieutenant. Explain
precision.
yourself.
The field
But
tests
as
show
his
they
hands
perform
reached
above
for the
standards,
biometric
sir.
scanner
Data is
that
flawed.
controlled access to the
revised
emergency
cache discovery
arsenal,
protocol
Brinley's
designates
voice
this
stopped
area
him
for immediate
mid-motion.
retrieval.
Center-weighted
Phase 1
stance,
begins now.
she observed
Did you
quietly.
see that smirk?
Her voice
the
carrying the
ACE system
authority of
active
someone
yet?
who'd learned
Almost
these
there,
lessons
look at her
under
go.
circumstances
He
where
seems pleased.
mistakes carried permanent consequences. Dominant foot slightly back. Weapon positioning suggests
All units,
expectation
this
of
is command.
close quarters
We have a confirmed
engagement
breach at Sector
rather than
Gamma.
perimeter defense.
Condemn red.
The tactical assessment hit the corridor like electricity, transforming routine emergency preparation into something that belonged in advanced military training programs.
Is that really her?
Nash stared at Brinley with the expression
they
of
call
someone
Ace.
who'd just watched
Looks
physics
like it.
behave in ways that violated fundamental laws.
Who is she?
How do you know his tactical positioning? Nash demanded.
never
But
seen
his voice
anything
carried
like it.
less authority than it
He
had
didn't stand a
before,
chance.
as if the accumulated weight of evidence was
Should we
beginning
move
to
him yet?
reshape his understanding of
Not
who he
until
was
she's
dealing
finished.
with. Brinley's response came without
He looks rough.
hesitation, delivered with the kind
Nightingale
of
is
clinical
down.
precision
Repeat,
that
Nightingale
belonged
is
to
down.
people who'd been tested
Is
on
that
this
really
information under circumstances where accuracy
baiting her.
meant survival rather than academic achievement. Stance reflects threat assessment, she said, moving closer to the weapon locker, with movements that suggested familiarity rather than curiosity. Close quarters
Seismic
preparation
activity is
indicates
increasing.
expectation of interior
behind cover.
assault
The door is
rather than
compromised.
perimeter containment.
You thought
Her
you could
voice gained
undermine me in my
momentum
own
like someone
command center.
following logical
That insignia
conclusions to
means
their
nothing here,
inevitable
Commander.
destination.
This is an
Professional
ACE
coordination
operation now.
suggests this attack was planned specifically to exploit current security weaknesses. The analysis was comprehensive, accurate, and delivered with the kind of professional competence that belonged to people who'd learned to read tactical situations
Yeah,
the way
Ace is
scholars
always
read
efficient.
ancient texts. But it was the way
Medevac,
she
this is
approached the
Viper
emergency
Actual.
equipment
Priority
that
1
transformed
transport inbound.
everyone's
I
understanding
repeat,
of the
clear the landing
situation.
zone immediately.
Gage found
We are
himself
moving now.
studying Brinley's movement
These nodes
patterns
are
with the
compromised.
intensity
We
of
move at
someone
0
trying to
600.
solve puzzles whose solutions
She actually
carried
did it.
personal significance.
I
There was
told you
something
she
about
would.
her automatic assessment
mail,
of the
GSW
weapon
to the
locker's
left
security
chest.
protocols
BP is 80 over
that
pulp.
triggered
He
memories
received 1
living in
unit
the
pack cells.
protected spaces
Continue
of
most
his
suspected,
mind.
applying
The
seal
way
now.
she evaluated sight lines, the unconscious calculation of distances and angles, the professional assessment of available defensive positions based on tactical requirements rather than personal comfort. These were behaviors that belonged to people
Just keep
who
the channel
learned to
secure.
think in
She's
terms
almost
of
done.
mission parameters rather than individual survival. Miss Knox, Nash said, his voice carrying the weight of official inquiry mixed with something that might have been
Look at her
dawning
go!
respect. Your tactical
actually
assessment
pulled it off.
suggests familiarity with combat scenarios that extends beyond civilian contractor experience in administrative
Look at that
positions.
hair.
The
Thinks she's
observation should have
invincible.
been accusatory,
We'll see
the
how
kind of
long that
official
lasts.
challenge that demanded explanation and justification. But there was something about Nash's tone that suggested professional recognition rather than
How long do you
bureaucratic
give her?
suspicion. Through
5
the
minutes
reinforced
tops before
windows,
she
they
cracks.
could see security teams
He's
moving with
relentless.
tactical precision
Keep
across the
scrubbing.
outer
Maybe you'll earn
perimeter.
your keep.
Their
Don't
movements
look up, just
coordinated
keep
with the
cleaning.
kind of professional efficiency that belonged to people who trained together long enough
The
to
incident was
communicate through
localized
muscle
within the
memory
Omega sector,
rather than
Commander.
verbal
And the
commands.
cause?
But as
cause?
Nash continued
We expect a
monitoring
full
the
report
tactical
by
situation
0800.
through his security tablet, something in the data streams caught his attention that changed his understanding of the threat from external assault to something far more dangerous and
Look at
personal.
her checking the names.
Internal communication protocols, he murmured, his
Wonder what
expression
she's really
shifting from
looking for.
professional concern to something approaching alarm.
The
Someone
selector
inside
switch
the
is right here.
compound is coordinating with
Semi-automatic
external
engagement
forces.
only.
Real-time
Look at her
intelligence
showing off.
sharing, current personnel positions,
trust her.
security
Did she really
protocol
trigger the
modifications.
ACE protocol?
The revelation transformed the sealed corridor
Look at her,
from a
she's not
place of
even
external
scared.
threat protection into something that belonged in
As you can
counterintelligence
see, the ACE
scenarios
system
where the
handles the
enemy
primary
included
encryption
people
across
with
all bands.
legitimate
The
access to
interface
classified
simplifies the frequency
information
hopping sequence.
and institutional
field-
Your data
authority.
sheet indicates
Colt's
these plates
expression
failed the
hardened
kinetic impact
as the
test,
implications
Lieutenant. Explain
became
yourself.
clear.
The field tests
Mole,
show they perform
he
above
said,
standards, sir.
the word
Data
carrying
is
weight that
flawed.
belonged in
The
spy
revised
novels
cache
rather
discovery
than
protocol
routine
designates
security
this area for
operations.
immediate retrieval. retrieval.
someone with access
Phase
to
one
current
begins
operational
now.
protocols and
Did you see that
personnel
smirk?
information.
Is the ACE
But as the
system
three men
active yet?
processed the
Almost
reality
there.
of
Look at her
internal
go.
security
She seems
compromise,
pleased.
Brinley did something that changed the fundamental nature of their tactical situation, from defensive
All units,
positioning
this is
to
command.
something
We have a
approaching
confirmed breach at
operational
Sector
planning.
Gamma.
She moved toward the
Good
emergency communication panel with the kind of systematic efficiency that belonged to people who'd learned to conduct equipment assessments under time pressure, that left no room for hesitation
really her?
or incomplete preparation. Her
one
hands
they
moved
call
across the
Ace.
communication controls
like
with
it.
professional familiarity, checking frequency settings and encryption protocols with automatic precision.
I've never seen
She
anything
assessed
like
signal
it.
strength indicators
He didn't
and
stand a
communication
chance.
range capabilities with the kind of
Should
rapid
we move 'em yet?
calculation that belonged to people
Not
who'd
until she's
learned to
finished.
think in terms of maintaining contact
He
under
looks
hostile
rough.
conditions. Communication
Nightingale is down.
compromise,
Repeat,
she
Nightingale is
announced,
down.
her voice carrying the
really
flat
necessary?
precision of someone conducting technical analysis
her.
rather than speculation. Internal frequencies monitored, encryption protocols potentially compromised, standard tactical channels may be providing intelligence to hostile forces. The assessment continued to flow
Seismic
from her
activity
like
is
professional
increasing.
instruction, delivered to
behind
people
cover,
who
the door
needed
is
to understand
compromised.
these concepts for
You thought you
reasons
could
that
undermine
extended
me in my
beyond
own
academic
command center.
curiosity.
That insignia
But it was the
means
way she
nothing here,
handled the
Commander.
communication
This is an
equipment
ACE
that transformed
operation now.
everyone's understanding from theoretical recognition to practical demonstration. Nash found himself studying her equipment assessment with the expression of someone who just
She cleared
discovered
that fast.
his carefully ordered world contained variables he'd never learned
Yeah,
to
Ace
calculate.
is always efficient.
Miss Knox, he said slowly, your
Medevac, this is
familiarity with
Viper
military
Actual.
communication
Priority 1
systems
transport inbound.
suggests training
I
that
repeat,
extends
clear the
far
landing zone
beyond
immediately.
civilian
We are moving
contractor
now.
orientation programs.
These nodes are compromised.
The observation
We move
hung
at
between them like
0600.
electricity, charging the atmosphere
did
with
it.
implications that could reshape
I told you
entire
she
command
would.
structures if they
Gauge,
continued
male,
to develop
GSW to the
along their
left
current
chest.
trajectory.
BP is 80
But
over
before
Palp.
Brinley
He
could
received one
offer
unit
another
pack cells.
carefully
Tension
crafted
pneumo
deflection,
suspected, applying
the
cell now.
compound's emergency systems delivered information that transformed their tactical situation from theoretical assessment to immediate crisis requiring professional response based on operational competence rather than bureaucratic procedure. Security
Just keep the
alert
channel
level
secure.
2, the
She's almost
electronic
done.
voice announced. Hostile forces have breached secondary perimeter. Close quarters engagement probable. All personnel implement combat readiness protocols. The announcement hit the corridor like
actually pulled it
artillery
off.
fire, transforming theoretical discussion about internal security compromise into immediate tactical
that hair.
reality where decisions
she's
made in the
invincible.
next few minutes could
see
determine
how
whether
long that
classified
lasts.
information remained secure or fell into hostile hands. But as the tactical situation deteriorated around them, something happened
How
that
long do you
changed
give her?
everything about their understanding
5
of the
minutes
woman
tops
who'd been
before she
cleaning
cracks.
floors while they'd been treating
He's
her as a
relentless.
security risk, rather than
Keep scrubbing.
recognizing
Maybe you'll
her
earn
as
your keep.
potentially their
Don't
best
look up,
hope
just
for
keep
survival.
cleaning.
The lights went out completely. Not the planned emergency lighting reduction they'd experienced
incident was
before,
localized within
but
the Omega
complete
sector,
electrical
Commander.
failure
And the
that
cause?
plunged the corridor
cause?
into
We
darkness
expect
so
a full report
absolute
by
it seemed to have
0800.
physical weight. Emergency power systems struggled to activate, creating seconds of perfect blackout in a facility where visibility could mean the difference between
at her,
identifying
checking the
threats and
names.
becoming casualties. In that darkness,
Wonder
they
what
heard
she's
movement,
really looking
not the
for.
confused shuffling of people trying to navigate
The selector
unfamiliar
switch is
terrain,
right here.
but the controlled,
Semi-automatic
purposeful
engagement
sounds
only.
of someone who'd learned to function in environments where light was luxury
trust her.
rather than
Did she
necessity.
really trigger the
When
ACE
emergency
protocol?
power finally engaged and restored minimal illumination,
she's not even
Brinley
scared.
was no longer where she'd been when darkness fell.
As you
She'd
can
moved
see,
to
the
a
ACE
defensive
system
position
handles
that
the
provided
primary
optimal
encryption
sight
across all
lines to
bands.
both ends of
The
the
interface
corridor
simplifies the
while
frequency
maintaining
hopping
cover
sequence.
behind structural
field?
Your data
elements
sheet
that could stop
indicates these
small
plates
arms
failed the
fire.
kinetic
More
impact test,
significantly,
Lieutenant.
she was
Explain
holding
yourself.
the
The field
HK-4
tests show they
Scateen
performed
assault
above standard,
rifle
sir.
from the
The
emergency
data is
weapon
flawed.
locker.
The
The
revised
sophisticated
cache
weapon
discovery
positioned
protocol
with the kind of
designates this area for
professional
immediate
competence that
retrieval.
belonged to
Phase
people
one
who'd learned to
begins
prepare
now.
for combat under
you see that
circumstances
smirk?
where equipment,
Is the ACE system
familiarity
active
meant
yet?
the difference between
Almost there.
mission
Look at her go.
success and
She seems
catastrophic
pleased.
failure. Holy cow, Colt whispered, staring at the transformation from disabled cleaning lady to
All
what
units,
appeared to
this is
be a
command.
fully
We have a
operational
confirmed breach
combat
at Sector
specialist
Gamma.
equipped with military-grade weapons and positioned according to tactical doctrine that belonged in special operations manuals. Gage found himself studying her weapon handling with the intensity of someone
really
trying
her?
to solve puzzles that carried personal
one they call
significance
Ace.
beyond their immediate
Looks like
tactical
it.
implications. There was something about her
Who is
grip,
she?
her stance, her automatic assessment of the rifle's
never seen
condition
anything like
that
it.
triggered recognition
He
from
didn't stand a
memories he'd been
chance.
trying to avoid. Professional weapons
we move him
handling,
yet?
Nash observed, his
Not until
voice
she's
carrying
finished.
the weight of official acknowledgement, mixed with
He looks
something
rough.
that might have been developing professional respect.
Nightingale is down.
Advanced
Repeat,
tactical
Nightingale is down.
positioning, the kind of competence
really
that's
necessary?
reserved for people with very specific training
baiting her.
backgrounds. But as Nash moved closer to observe Brinley's combat preparation, the compound's communication systems crackled to life with information that transformed their understanding of the tactical situation from
Seismic
external
activity
assault
is
to
increasing.
something far more personal
behind
and
cover. The door is
dangerous.
compromised.
Bravo team to command,
You
a
thought you
voice
could
reported
undermine
through
me in my own
static-filled
command
channels.
center.
We
That
have eyes
insignia
on the
means
primary
nothing here,
target.
Commander.
Female,
This is an ACE
approximately
operation
27
now.
years old, distinctive eye patch, confirming visual identification. The transmission hit the corridor like a physical blow, transforming their situation from
cleared that
routine
fast.
facility defense to something that belonged in targeted assassination
Yeah, Ace is
scenarios
always
where the
efficient.
stakes involved specific individuals
Medevac, this
rather
is
than
Viper
institutional
Actual. Priority
security.
1, transport
Nash
inbound.
stared at his
I
security
repeat, clear
tablet
the landing
as
zone
additional
immediately.
intelligence
We are moving
reports
now.
painted an increasingly
These nodes
clear
are
picture
compromised.
of what they
we
were
move
facing.
at 0600.
They're not here for classified
actually did it.
information, he said.
I
His
told you
voice
she
tight
would.
with understanding that
Gauge,
belonged
male,
to people
GSW
who
to
just
the left
solved
chest.
equations
BP is
with
80 over
variables
palp.
they'd never
Received one
wanted to
unit pack
calculate.
cells.
They're
Tension
here
unit
for
suspected.
you.
Applying seal now.
The words transformed the corridor from a place of routine lockdown into something that belonged in witness protection scenarios, complete with the weight of personal threat
He's here.
and the promise of violence directed at specific individuals rather than institutional targets.
Just keep the channel secure.
But instead of
She's
showing
almost
fear
done.
or surprise at the revelation that hostile forces had breached a classified facility, specifically to eliminate her, Brinley did something that changed everyone's
go.
understanding of who she was and what her
actually
presence
pulled
at
it
the
off.
compound represented. She smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible in the emergency lighting,
Look at that
but
hair.
it carried with it the
Thinks
weight
she's
of
invincible.
recognition that belonged to people
We'll see
who had
how
been
long that
expecting this
lasts.
moment for months or years. Finally, she said quietly, her voice carrying authority that belonged to people who'd learned to command under
How long do
pressure
you
that
give
could
her?
break normal human
5
psychology.
minutes tops before
I was
she
beginning to
cracks.
think they'd never figure
He's
out where I
relentless.
was. Are you starting to
Keep scrubbing.
suspect who
Maybe
she
you'll earn
really
your keep.
is?
Don't look
Drop
up.
your
Just
theory
keep
in the
playing it.
comments. Is she former military? Intelligence? Something even more
The
dangerous?
incident was localized
Smash
within the
that
Omega
like
sector,
button if you're
Commander.
dying
And
to
the
know the
cause?
truth about
And the
her
cause?
identity.
We expect
The
a full
confession
report by
transformed the
0800.
corridor from a place of routine emergency response into something that belonged in classified operational briefings, where the participants included people whose
Look at her, checking
existence
the
was
names.
protected by congressional oversight and presidential signatures.
Wonder what she's really
Nash
looking
moved
for.
closer, his expression cycling through suspicion,
The selector switch is right
calculation,
here.
and something that might have been
Semi-automatic
dawning
engagement only.
comprehension
Look
as
at
the
her showing
implications
off.
of Brinley's admission began
I
to
don't trust
reshape
her.
his understanding
Did
of
she really
everything
trigger
that had
the ACE
happened
protocol?
since their interaction began. You've been expecting
her,
this,
she's not
he
even
said,
scared.
but it wasn't really a question. His voice carried
As
the
you
weight
can
of
see, the
someone who
ACE
just
system handles
realized
the
that his
primary
carefully
encryption
controlled
across all
security
bands.
assessment
The
had
interface
stumbled
simplifies
into
the frequency hopping
operational
sequence.
territory
And the
that
filter.
Your
existed
data sheet
far
indicates
beyond
these
the
plates
reach of
failed the
routine
kinetic impact
personnel
test,
management.
Lieutenant. Explain yourself.
Brinley
The
checked
field
the
tests show they perform above
HK-416's
standards,
chamber
sir.
status
The
with
data is
movements
flawed.
that demonstrated the
revised
kind of
cache
muscle
discovery
memory
protocol
that belonged to
designates this
people
area
who'd
for
performed
immediate
these
retrieval.
actions thousands
Phase
of
1
times
begins
under
now.
circumstances where
see
equipment
that
failure
smirk?
meant mission
Is the
failure,
ACE
and
system
mission
active
failure
yet?
meant consequences
there.
that
Look at her
extended
go.
far
He seems
beyond
pleased.
individual survival. 18 months, she confirmed, her voice gaining the authority that belonged to
All
people
units,
who'd
this is
finally
command.
stopped
We have a
pretending to
confirmed
be
breach
less
at
than they
Sector
were.
Gamma.
18 months of waiting, watching, learning the patterns and vulnerabilities of everyone in this compound. She paused, letting the implications settle like truth delivered through revelation
really her?
rather than investigation. 18
The one
months
they
of
call
hunting the
Ace.
mole who's been selling
Looks like
American
it.
operator identities to foreign intelligence
Who is she?
services. The revelation hit the corridor like artillery
Never
fire,
seen anything
transforming
like it.
everything they thought
didn't
they
stand a
understood about
chance.
routine personnel management
Should we
into
move 'em
something
yet?
that belonged in counterintelligence
she's finished.
operations, where the stakes involved national
looks
security,
rough.
and the players included people whose
Nightingale is
missions
down.
existed
Repeat,
beyond the
Nightingale
reach
is
of
down.
conventional explanation.
necessary?
Colt stared at her with the expression
He's
of
baiting
someone
her.
who just discovered that his understanding of reality had been built on foundations that were never adequate for the loads they were expected to support. Hunting, he repeated, the word carrying implications that belonged in
Seismic
predator-prey
activity is
relationships rather than
Get behind
civilian
cover. The
employment
door is
situations.
compromised.
Counterintelligence
undermine me
operation,
in my own
Brinley
command center.
confirmed,
That
her remaining
insignia
eye
means
scanning the
nothing here,
corridor
Commander.
with the kind of
This is an
professional
ACE
assessment
operation
that
now.
belonged to people who'd learned to evaluate tactical situations through experience gained in environments where situational awareness meant survival rather than academic
She
achievement.
cleared that fast.
Deep cover assignment, long-term penetration of security networks
Ace is
to
always
identify
efficient.
and eliminate foreign intelligence assets
Medevac, this is Viper
operating
Actual.
within American
Priority
Special
1
Operations
transport inbound.
communities.
I repeat,
The
clear the
explanation
landing zone
transformed their
immediately. We are
understanding
moving
from
now.
routine facility
These nodes are
security to
compromised.
something that
We move
belonged
at
in classified
0600.
mission briefings, where the objectives
actually did it.
involved protecting national
told
assets
you she
through
would.
elimination of hostile
Gauge,
intelligence
male, GSW
networks
to
that
the
had
left
penetrated
chest.
American
BP is 80 over
military
palp. He
institutions.
received 1 unit pack
Nash
cells.
consulted his
Attention, pneumo
security
suspected,
tablet with
applying seal
renewed
now.
urgency, his fingers dancing across classified databases with the kind of access that painted an increasingly complex picture of operational authority
He's
and
here.
mission parameters that existed beyond normal command structures. Miss Knox, he said
Just keep the
slowly,
channel secure.
if your assignment
almost
involves
done.
counterintelligence operations against foreign assets, then your presence here suggests that someone in this compound has been compromised by hostile intelligence services. The observation
actually pulled
transformed
it
the
off.
corridor from a place of external threat management into something that belonged in internal security investigations,
Look at that hair.
where trusted personnel
Thinks she's
became
invincible.
suspects and routine
We'll see how long
interactions
that
became
lasts.
potential intelligence compromise scenarios. But before Brinley could confirm his suspicion, the compound's tactical communication systems delivered information
long
that
do you give
changed
her?
their situation from
5
theoretical
minutes tops before she
counterintelligence
cracks.
discussion to immediate
relentless.
operational crisis requiring
Keep scrubbing.
rapid
Maybe you'll
response
earn your
based on
keep.
professional
Don't look up.
competence
Just keep cleaning.
rather than bureaucratic procedure. Alpha Team reports hostile penetration of main
incident
security
was localized
perimeter,
within the
the
Omega
voice
sector,
crackled
Commander.
through
And the
static-filled
KOS?
channels.
And the KOS?
Multiple
expect a
casualties.
full report
Request
by
immediate backup
0800.
to Operations Center. Suspect internal coordination with Assault Force. The transmission painted a picture of tactical disaster unfolding throughout the compound,
Look at her checking the
with
names.
security forces facing organized assault by
Wonder what
hostiles who
she's
possess
really looking
detailed
for.
knowledge of defensive positions and personnel
The selector switch
locations
is
that
right
could
here.
only come from internal
Semi-automatic
intelligence sources.
engagement only.
As Nash
Look at her
processed the
showing off.
implications of coordinated internal and
trust her.
external
Did
threats,
she really trigger
his
the
expression
ACE
shifted to
protocol?
something that belonged in crisis management scenarios
Look at
where
her, she's not even
institutional
scared.
survival depended on rapid identification and
As you can
elimination
see,
of
the ACE
security
system handles
compromises.
the primary
The
encryption
mole,
across all
he
bands.
said,
The
his
interface
voice
simplifies
carrying
the
the weight
frequency
of
hopping
understanding
sequence.
that
And the
belonged
Your
to
data
people
sheet
who
indicates
just
these
solved
plates failed
puzzles
the kinetic
with
impact
consequences
test,
that
Lieutenant.
extended
Explain
far
yourself.
The field
beyond
tests show they
individual
perform above
careers.
standards, sir.
Someone
The
with
data is
access to
flawed.
current
The
operational
revised cache
intelligence.
discovery protocol
Someone who's
designates
been
this
feeding
area for
information to
immediate
hostile
retrieval.
services.
Phase 1 begins
His
now.
eyes focused on Brinley
you
with
see
new
that smirk?
intensity.
Is the ACE
Someone you have
system active
identified
yet?
through 18
Almost
months
there.
of
Look at her go.
investigation.
He seems
The
pleased.
tactical situation continued to deteriorate around them as emergency systems broadcast increasingly urgent
All
reports
units, this
of
is
security
command. We have a
compromise
confirmed breach at
and
Sector
hostile
Gamma.
penetration
Condemn
throughout
red.
multiple areas of the compound. But instead of immediate revelation about the mole's identity, the corridor's reinforced doors suddenly unlocked with electronic authority that belonged
really
to
her?
security overrides rather than routine
The one they
access
call
protocols. The massive
Looks like
barrier slid apart to reveal Captain Nash Vaughn,
is she?
entering with a tactical team equipped with military-grade
Never seen
weapons
anything
and
like it.
professional coordination
He didn't
that
stand a
suggested
chance.
extensive training in assault operations
Should we
rather
move him
than
yet?
defensive positioning.
Not
But
until
there
she's
was something
finished.
wrong with the picture. The tactical team moved
looks
with
rough.
hostile intent rather than rescue
Nightingale
coordination.
is down.
Their weapons
Repeat,
were
Nightingale is
positioned for
down.
assault rather
really
than security
necessary?
support. And Nash Vaughn's
baiting
expression carried the cold calculation that belonged to people who decided that certain problems required permanent solutions. "Stand down, all of you," Nash commanded, his voice carrying authority that
Seismic
belonged to people
activity is
accustomed
increasing.
to having their orders
Get
followed
behind cover.
without
The door is
question or
compromised.
hesitation. Security
You thought
assessment
you could undermine
complete.
me in my own command
Target
center.
acquired.
That
The
insignia
words
means
transformed the
nothing here,
corridor
Commander.
from a place
This
of
is an
institutional
ACE
protection
operation now.
into something that belonged in execution scenarios where operational security required elimination of personnel who possessed information that could compromise classified missions. Gage stared at Nash with the expression of someone
Yeah,
who
Ace
just
is
watched
always
trusted
efficient.
leadership reveal itself as hostile
Medevac, this is
intelligence
Viper
asset.
Actual.
His
Priority
tactical
1
mind
transport
struggling to
inbound.
process
I
betrayal
repeat,
that
clear the landing
redefined
zone
everything
immediately.
he'd
We are
believed
moving
about
now.
institutional loyalty
These
and
nodes are
professional
compromised.
integrity.
We move at
"You're the mole,"
0600.
he said, but his voice carried
actually
less
did it.
surprise than it should have.
I
As if
told you
some
she
part
would.
of him had been expecting
Gauge,
this
male,
revelation
GSW
through
to the left
subconscious
chest.
recognition
BP
of
is 80 over
behavioral
palp. He
patterns
received
that
1
didn't
unit pack
quite
cells.
fit normal
Attention, pneumo
command
suspected,
authority.
applying seal now.
Nash's smile carried the cold efficiency that belonged to people who'd learned to eliminate problems through superior application of violence and professional competence rather
here.
than negotiation or institutional procedure. 18 months of preparation.
Just
he
keep the channel
confirmed,
secure.
gesturing
She's
to his
almost done.
tactical team with the kind of casual authority that suggested this operation had been planned with meticulous attention to detail and timing. waiting for
Look at her
confirmation
go.
that our intelligence was
actually
correct,
pulled it
that the
off.
legendary Phantom had survived her apparent death and was conducting unauthorized counterintelligence operations
Look at that
against
hair.
legitimately
Thinks she's
established
invincible.
intelligence networks.
We'll see how
The
long that
revelation
lasts.
transformed their understanding of the tactical situation from routine facility security to something that belonged in international intelligence warfare,
How
where
long do you
American
give her?
operators found themselves targeted
minutes
for
tops
elimination
before
by
she cracks.
networks that included compromised
relentless.
personnel within their own
Keep
command
scrubbing. Maybe
structures.
you'll earn your keep.
But as
Don't
Nash's
look up.
tactical
Just
team
keep
moved to
cleaning.
secure the corridor and eliminate the threat that Brinley represented to their intelligence operations,
incident was localized
something
within the
happened that
Omega
changed
sector,
the fundamental
Commander.
nature
And
of
the
the
cause?
engagement
And the
from
cause?
theoretical
We expect a full
discussion
report by
to immediate
0800.
combat requiring professional response based on operational competence rather than bureaucratic authority. Gage Sterling drew his sidearm, not with the hesitant
her, checking the
uncertainty of
names.
someone making difficult decisions under pressure, but
Wonder
with the
what she's
smooth
really looking
efficiency that
for.
belonged to people who'd learned to respond to threats
The
through
selector
training
switch is right
that
here.
made appropriate action
Semi-automatic
automatic
engagement
rather than
only.
deliberative.
Look at her
Step
showing
away
off.
from her, he commanded, his
I don't
voice
trust
carrying
her.
the authority
Did she
that
really
belonged to
trigger the
people
ACE
who'd made the
protocol?
transition from confusion to clarity
Look at
through
her, she's not
recognition
even
of where their
scared.
loyalties actually belonged. The
As
standoff
you can see,
transformed the
ACE
corridor
system
from a
handles
place
the
of
primary
routine
encryption
intelligence
across all bands.
operation
The interface
into something
simplifies
that
the frequency
belonged in
hopping
combat
sequence.
zones,
And the
where
field-
Your
American
data sheet
operators
indicates these
found
plates
themselves
failed the kinetic
choosing
impact
between
test, Lieutenant.
institutional
Explain yourself.
authority
The field
and
tests show
personal
they perform above
conscience in
standards, sir.
situations
The
where
data is
both
flawed.
choices carried
revised cache
consequences
discovery
that could
protocol
define the
designates
rest of
this
their
area for
shortened
immediate
lives.
retrieval.
Nash's
Phase one
expression
begins
shifted
now.
from cold
that
efficiency
smirk?
to something
Is the
approaching
ACE system
professional
active yet?
respect as he
Almost there. Look at her
evaluated the
go.
tactical
He seems
situation that
pleased.
had developed around his carefully planned operation. Interesting choice, Sterling, he observed, his voice
All
carrying
units,
the
this
weight
is
of
command.
someone
We have a
who
confirmed
understood
breach
that
at Sector
operational
Gamma.
plans sometimes require
red.
adaptive responses to unexpected variables. Protecting a ghost who's been conducting unauthorized operations against legitimate intelligence assets. That's either remarkable
Is that really
loyalty
her?
or remarkable stupidity.
The one they call ACE.
But as the tactical standoff
like it.
continued to develop, with weapons trained in multiple
is she?
directions and loyalties divided between institutional
Never seen
authority
anything like
and
it.
personal conviction,
He didn't stand a
the
chance.
compound's emergency systems delivered
Should we
information that
move him yet?
transformed their localized
Not until
crisis
she's finished.
into something that belonged in national security
looks rough.
scenarios. Charlie Team
Nightingale
reports
is down.
total
Repeat, Nightingale is
communications
down.
compromise.
that really
The voice
necessary?
crackled through deteriorating channels.
He's baiting
All
her.
tactical frequencies monitored by hostile forces. Internal coordination confirmed. Repeat. Internal coordination confirmed with external assault elements. The transmission painted a picture of
Seismic activity is
institutional
increasing.
betrayal that extended far
behind
beyond
cover. The door is
individual moles
compromised.
into systematic
thought you could
compromise of
undermine me in
American
my own
Special
command center.
Operations
That
security
insignia means
by
nothing
intelligence
here,
networks
Commander.
that had
This is
achieved
an ACE
penetration at
operation
multiple
now.
levels of command authority. Legal education programs covering military justice, veterans' rights, and security clearance issues for transitioning service members. As the implications of systematic security compromise became
Yeah,
clear,
ACE is always
Gage
efficient.
felt something shift in his understanding of the
Medevac,
tactical
this is Viper
situation,
Actual.
from protection of
Priority one,
individual
transport inbound.
personnel
I repeat,
to defense
clear
of
the landing zone
institutional
immediately.
integrity
We are
against
moving now.
hostile intelligence networks
These nodes are
that had
compromised.
achieved
We move
dangerous
at
levels of
0600.
penetration. How many?
She
He
actually did it.
demanded. His weapon trained on
I told
Nash
you
with the
she
kind
would.
of professional
Gage,
steadiness
male,
that belonged to
GSW to the
people
left
who'd learned
chest.
to
BP is
maintain
80 over
accuracy
Palp.
under
He received
stress
1 unit
that could
pack
break
cells.
normal
Attention
human
pneumo
psychology.
suspected, applying seal
How
now.
many American operators have been compromised? How many missions sold? How many good people killed because of intelligence you provided to hostile services? Nash's response
here.
carried the cold calculation that belonged to people who'd learned to justify terrible actions
Just
through
keep the channel
reference to
secure.
larger
She's
strategic
almost done.
objectives that existed beyond the reach of conventional moral considerations. Enough to ensure that American special operations capabilities are properly balanced against
Look at her
legitimate
go.
international security
She actually
interests,
pulled
he
it
said.
off.
His voice maintaining the clinical detachment that belonged to people who had learned to discuss human casualties
Look at
as
that
acceptable
hair.
losses
Thinks
in
she's
pursuit
invincible.
of strategic objectives.
We'll see how
Enough
long
to
that
prevent
lasts.
unilateral American action that threatens global stability. The ideological justification transformed their confrontation from simple
How
betrayal
long do you
into
give
something
her?
that belonged in
5
philosophical
minutes
discussions
tops before
about
she cracks.
nationalism, internationalism,
relentless.
and the moral boundaries of
scrubbing. Maybe you'll
intelligence
earn your
work
keep.
in
Don't
environments
look
where
up. Just keep
competing
cleaning.
loyalties created impossible choices. But as Nash continued to position his
The incident
tactical
was
team for
localized within the
resolution of
Omega
the
sector,
threat that
Commander.
Brinley represented to
cause?
their intelligence
cause?
operations,
We expect a full
Colt
report by
Ryder finally
0800.
understood the fundamental nature of the situation they'd stumbled into through bureaucratic accident rather than deliberate investigation. She's not the threat, he said,
Look at
his
her
voice
checking the
carrying the
names.
weight of recognition that belonged to people who'd just solved
Wonder what she's
equations
really
with
looking
variables
for.
they'd never wanted to calculate. She's hunting the
selector
threat.
switch is
You're
right
the
here.
threat, and we've been helping you
Semi-automatic
identify
engagement
her for the
only.
past 2
Look at her
hours.
showing off.
The revelation transformed his understanding
trust
of their
her.
interaction
Did she really
from
trigger the
routine
ACE
personnel
protocol?
assessment to something that belonged in intelligence entrapment
her, she's not
scenarios,
even scared.
where routine conversations became sources of operational
As you can see, the
intelligence
ACE
that could
system
determine
handles the
mission
primary
success
encryption
or
across all
failure.
bands.
Nash's
The interface
expression
simplifies the
confirmed
frequency
Colt's
hopping
understanding
sequence.
with the
And the
kind
Your
of
data sheet
professional
indicates these
acknowledgement
plates
that
failed the
belonged to
kinetic
people who
impact
no
test,
longer
Lieutenant.
needed to
Explain yourself.
maintain
The field tests
operational
show they
cover
perform above
once their
standards, sir.
missions had
The data
achieved
is
tactical
flawed.
objectives.
The revised cache
Very good,
discovery
he
protocol
said,
designates this
gesturing
area
to his
for
tactical
immediate
team with
retrieval.
casual
Phase
authority.
1 begins now.
Yes, your assessment
that
of our
smirk?
mysterious
Is the
maintenance
ACE
worker
system active
provided
yet?
exactly the
Almost there, look at her
confirmation
go.
we needed
He
that
seems
Phantom had
pleased.
survived her apparent death and was conducting counterintelligence operations that threatened legitimate
All units,
international
this is command.
cooperation
We have a confirmed
agreements.
breach at Sector
But as
Gamma.
Nash's team moved to secure their operational objectives through elimination of personnel who pose threats to international intelligence cooperation, the corridor's emergency lighting suddenly failed again,
Is that really
plunging
her?
them into darkness that belonged to combat
one
zones
they
where
call
visibility
Ace.
meant survival
Looks like
and
it.
professional competence meant the difference between mission
is she?
success and catastrophic failure. In that darkness,
seen
several
anything
things
like
happened
it.
simultaneously.
He didn't stand a
Automatic
chance.
weapons fire erupted from multiple positions.
we move him yet?
Tactical flashlights created
until she's
chaotic
finished.
patterns of illumination that revealed movement
He looks
without
rough.
providing clear target identification.
Nightingale is down.
And someone with
Repeat,
extensive
Nightingale is
training
down.
in close quarters
that really
combat
necessary?
began systematically eliminating threats
baiting
with the
her.
kind of professional efficiency that belonged to people who'd learned to function in environments where darkness was advantage rather than obstacle. When emergency power finally restored minimal lighting to the corridor, the tactical
Seismic activity
situation
is
had been
increasing.
fundamentally
behind
transformed
cover.
through
The door is
application of
compromised.
superior training and
You thought you could
professional
undermine me
competence
in my
rather
own
than
command
superior
center.
numbers
That
or
insignia
equipment.
means nothing,
Nash's
Commander.
tactical team
This
was
is an
neutralized,
ACE operation
not
now.
killed, but incapacitated through precise application of non-lethal force that demonstrated the kind of professional skill that belonged to people who'd learned to neutralize threats without creating unnecessary casualties. Nash himself was
Yeah,
disarmed
Ace is
and
always
secured,
efficient.
his expression cycling between professional
this is
respect
Viper
and
Actual.
genuine
Priority
surprise
one,
at the speed
transport
and
inbound.
efficiency with
I
which his
repeat,
carefully
clear the
planned
landing zone
operation
immediately.
had been
We are
countered
moving
by
now.
someone who possessed training
These nodes
that
are
exceeded his
compromised.
team's
We move at
capabilities.
0600.
And Brinley Knox stood in the center
She
of the
actually did it.
corridor, no longer the disabled
I told you
cleaning
she
lady
would.
they'd been mocking for the
Gauge,
past
male,
few
GSW
hours,
to the left
but
chest.
someone whose
BP is 80
professional
over palp.
competence
He
and
received 1
tactical
unit pack
authority
cells.
belonged to
Attention, U.S.
legends
suspected,
rather
applying
than
seal
routine
now.
personnel management. But it was what happened next that transformed their understanding from recognition of professional capability to something approaching comprehension
He's here.
of who she really was and what her presence at the compound meant in terms of operational
keep the
security
channel secure.
and
She's
institutional
almost done.
protection. Gage Sterling, who'd been positioned near the corridor's emergency communication panel when the lights failed, was now lying against the wall, with blood
Look at her
seeping
go.
through his tactical vest
She
from what
actually
appeared to
pulled it
be a
off.
high-velocity projectile wound to his upper chest. His breathing was shallow, labored, the
Look at
kind
that
of
hair.
respiratory distress
Think
that
she's
belonged
invincible.
to people whose bodies were shutting
see how
down
long
from
that
trauma
lasts.
that exceeded their biological capacity to maintain normal function. Medic, he whispered, but his voice carried less volume than a normal conversation,
do you
the
give
kind
her?
of failing strength that indicated
minutes
serious
tops before
internal
she cracks.
damage requiring immediate medical
relentless.
intervention. But it
Keep
was what he
scrubbing.
said
Maybe you'll
next
earn
that
your
changed
keep.
everything
Don't
about
look
their
up, just keep
understanding of the
training.
tactical situation, and revealed the connection that had been hidden beneath 18 months of
incident was
careful
localized
operational
within the
cover
Omega sector,
and professional
Commander.
distance.
And the cause?
And the cause?
Phantom,
We expect a
he
full
gasped,
report by
his eyes
0800.
focusing on Brinley with the kind of desperate recognition that belonged to people trying to communicate critical information before losing consciousness. Kandahar,
Look at her checking the names.
you saved my team.
Wonder
The
what
words
she's
escaped
really
in
looking
fragments,
for.
delivered through failing respiratory function, but
selector
carrying with
switch is
them
right here.
geographical and temporal weight
Semi-automatic
that belonged
engagement
to
only.
classified
at her
operations,
showing off.
conducted in places where people learned
trust
the
her.
difference between
Did she really
survival
trigger the
and
ACE
legend
protocol?
through lessons that left permanent impressions on everyone
her,
who
she's
lived
not
through
even
the
scared.
instruction. Brinley moved to his position with the kind of
As
rapid
you can
medical
see, the
assessment
ACE system
that belonged
handles
to
the
people
primary
who'd learned
encryption
to
across all
provide
bands.
emergency care
The
under
interface
combat
simplifies the frequency
conditions
hopping
where
sequence.
speed meant
And the
survival
data
and
sheet indicates
hesitation
these plates
meant
failed the
watching
kinetic
teammates
impact
die
test,
from
Lieutenant.
preventable
Explain
causes.
yourself.
The field tests
Her
show they
hands moved
perform
across
above
his
standards,
chest
sir.
with
The
professional
data is flawed.
competence, checking
revised
wound
cache
channels and
discovery protocol
evaluating internal
designates this
damage
area
with
for
the kind of
immediate
clinical
retrieval.
precision
Phase 1
that belonged to
begins now.
combat medics who'd learned to
see that
distinguish
smirk?
between
Is the
survivable
ACE system
trauma
active
and
yet?
fatal injuries
Almost there.
under
Look at her
time
go.
pressure that
He
left
seems
no room
pleased.
for uncertainty. Kandahar province, she confirmed, her voice carrying the authority that belonged to people
All
who
units,
finally
this is
stopped
command.
hiding
We have a
aspects of
confirmed breach at
themselves
Sector
that
Gamma.
defined everything about who they really were. Operation Nightfall, August 23rd, 2021. She paused, applying pressure to his wound with movements that demonstrated extensive training
really
in
hurt?
battlefield medicine. You were Tracker
The
2,
one they call
sniper
Ace.
team leader,
Looks
pinned
like
down by hostile fire for 6 hours until
is she?
extraction arrived. The recognition transformed their
I've never seen
interaction from
anything like
routine
it.
medical emergency
He didn't stand
to
a
something that
chance.
belonged in reunion scenarios between
we
people
move him
who
yet?
shared experience that
Not until
existed
she's
beyond the
finished.
reach of conventional explanation.
He looks
Nash,
rough.
despite being secured and disarmed,
Nightingale is
found
down.
himself
Repeat,
studying the
Nightingale is down.
exchange with the expression
really
of
necessary?
someone who just discovered that his intelligence
baiting
about
her.
operational casualties had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. "You're supposed to be dead," he said, his voice carrying the weight of professional confusion, mixed with something that might have been grudging respect.
Seismic activity is increasing.
Operation Nightfall.
Get behind
Total
cover. The door
loss.
is
No
compromised.
survivors. Official
You thought you could
after-action
undermine me
reports
in my own
confirmed
command
complete
center.
team
That
elimination.
insignia means
Brinley's
nothing here,
response
Commander.
came while continuing
This
her
is an
medical
ACE
care of Gage's
operation now.
wounds. Her attention divided between immediate patient care and tactical assessment of their deteriorating security situation. Officially dead, she confirmed,
cleared that fast.
her voice carrying the authority that belonged to people who understood the difference
Ace is
between
always
bureaucratic reality and operational
Medevac,
truth.
this is Viper Actual.
Medically
Priority 1
retired,
transport inbound.
honorably
I repeat,
discharged.
clear the landing zone
Pension
immediately.
benefits
We are
terminated
moving
due to
now.
combat-related
nodes are
disabilities that
compromised.
made
We move
continued
at
service
0600.
impossible. She paused,
She actually
checking
did it.
Gage's pulse and respiratory
I told you
function
she would.
with the kind of clinical
Gage,
precision
male, GSW
that
to
belonged
the
to
left
people
chest.
who'd learned
BP is 80
to
over
evaluate
pulp. He
trauma
received
through
1 unit
professional
pack cells.
training rather
Attention
than
newest
academic
suspected,
study.
applying seal now.
Unofficially, she continued, her remaining eyes scanning the corridor for additional threats while maintaining medical care protocols, recruited for deep cover counterintelligence
He's here.
operations against foreign networks that had achieved dangerous levels of penetration
Just keep the
into
channel
American
secure.
special
She's almost
operations
done.
communities. The explanation transformed their understanding of her presence at the compound from routine personnel management to something that belonged in classified mission briefings, where the objectives
She actually
involved
pulled it
protecting
off.
national security through elimination of hostile intelligence assets operating within American military
Look at that hair.
institutions. But
Thinks
as
she's
Brinley
invincible.
continued providing medical care
We'll see
to
how long
Gage
that
while
lasts.
maintaining tactical awareness of their security situation, something happened that revealed the final piece of the operational puzzle they'd been trying to solve
How long do
through
you
2
give her?
hours of careful
5
investigation
minutes
and
tops
professional
before she
assessment.
cracks.
Nash's
He's
secured
relentless.
hands moved to his collar
Keep
with the
scrubbing.
kind of
Maybe
subtle
you'll earn your
motion
keep.
that
Don't
belonged
look
to
up,
people
just keep
activating
cleaning.
concealed communication devices rather than attempting escape from restraint systems.
The incident was
Phantom
localized
confirmed
within the
alive
Omega
and
sector,
operational,
Commander.
And the
he
cause?
whispered into
And the
what
cause?
appeared to be a throat
expect a full
microphone
report by
hidden beneath his
0800.
uniform collar. Location secured. Elimination authorized. The transmission transformed their immediate tactical situation from resolved threat
at her
management to
checking the
something that
names.
belonged in ongoing combat operations,
Wonder
where
what she's
hostile
really
forces
looking for.
continued to coordinate assault activities despite the
selector switch is
neutralization
right
of
here.
internal intelligence
Semi-automatic
assets.
engagement only.
Colt caught the
her
communication
showing
attempt
off.
and moved to prevent additional
don't
transmissions,
trust her.
but the
Did she
damage was
really
already
trigger the
done.
ACE protocol?
External assault forces now possessed confirmation that
Look
their
at her, she's
primary
not even
target was
scared.
located in the secured corridor, along with detailed
As you can see,
intelligence
the
about
ACE
their
system
defensive
handles the
positioning
primary
and
encryption across
available
all
equipment.
bands.
The interface
How long?
simplifies the frequency
Brinley
hopping
asked,
sequence.
her voice
And the
carrying
failure?
the
Your
clinical
datasheet
precision
indicates
of
these
someone
plates failed the
conducting
kinetic
tactical
impact test,
assessment
Lieutenant.
while
Explain
continuing
yourself.
medical
field
care
tests show they
procedures.
perform above standards,
How long
sir.
before
The data is
external
flawed.
forces reached
The
this
revised
position?
cache discovery
Nash's
protocol
response carried the
designates this
cold
area for
efficiency that
immediate
belonged
retrieval.
to people who'd
Phase
learned
one
to
begins
calculate
now.
tactical timing through
you see that
professional
smirk?
experience
Is
in
the
assault
ACE system
operations
active yet?
rather than defensive
Almost
positioning.
there. Look at her go.
3 minutes,
He seems
he
pleased.
said, his voice maintaining authority despite his secured status. Professional assault team. Military-grade
this is
equipment,
command. We have a confirmed
specific
breach at
mission
Sector
parameters
Gamma.
focused on permanent elimination of operational security threats. The timeline transformed their immediate situation from stable defensive positioning to something that belonged in escape and
that really
evasion
her?
scenarios where survival depended on
one they call
mobility
Ace.
rather than fortified
Looks like it.
resistance against superior forces. But as the tactical reality of their situation became clear,
I've never
Brinley
seen
made a
anything
decision
like
that
it.
revealed the final
He didn't
aspect
stand
of
a
her
chance.
professional competence and operational authority
move him
that
yet?
had been hidden beneath months
Not
of
until
careful
she's
cover
finished.
and institutional camouflage.
He looks
She moved
rough.
to the corridor's emergency access panel
Nightingale
and
is
began
down.
imputating
Repeat, Nightingale
security
is down.
codes with the kind
Is
of
that really
rapid
necessary?
precision that belonged to people who possessed
He's
administrative
baiting her.
access to classified facility systems rather than routine maintenance authorization. "What are you doing?" Colt demanded, watching as blast doors began sliding shut throughout the compound with mechanical
Seismic
precision
activity is
that suggested
increasing.
coordinated security
Get behind
protocol
cover. The door is
activation
compromised.
rather than random emergency
You thought you could
response.
undermine me in my own
Brinley's
command
response
center.
came while
That
continuing her
insignia means
security
nothing
system
here,
manipulation,
Commander.
her
This is
fingers
an
dancing
ACE
across
operation
control
now.
interfaces with professional familiarity that demonstrated extensive training in facility management rather than civilian contractor orientation. "Initiating Ghost Protocol," she announced, her voice carrying authority that belonged to people
Yeah,
who
Ace is
had been
always
granted
efficient.
operational control over institutional
Medevac,
security
this is Viper
systems.
Actual. Priority
Automated
1,
defense
transport inbound.
activation,
I repeat,
hostile force
clear the landing zone
containment,
immediately.
personnel
We are moving
protection
now.
through secured
These nodes are
facility
compromised.
lockdown.
We move
The
at
protocol
0600.
transformed their immediate tactical
She actually did it.
situation from escape and evasion
told you she
to
would.
something that belonged in
Gauge,
fortress
male,
defense
GSW to the left
scenarios,
chest.
where
BP is
institutional
80 over
security
palp. He
systems
received 1 unit
provided
pack cells.
protection against
10 pneuma
external
suspected,
assault
applying seal
through
now.
technological superiority rather than personnel competence. Throughout the compound, automated defense systems activated with mechanical precision,
He's
motion
here.
sensors that could distinguish between authorized personnel and hostile forces,
Just keep the channel
weapon
secure.
systems that could
She's
engage
almost done.
targets with lethal accuracy without requiring human operators, communication jammers that could prevent coordination between internal and external hostile elements.
at her go!
But as the Ghost Protocol
She
continued
actually
to
pulled it
engage
off.
throughout the facility, transforming routine security systems into something that belonged in military installations
hair.
designed to withstand
she's
siege
invincible.
operations,
We'll see how
Nash's
long that
expression
lasts.
shifted to something that might have been professional recognition mixed with genuine surprise. "Ghost Protocol," he repeated, the phrase carrying
How long do you
implications
give
that
her?
belonged in congressional oversight
minutes
rather
tops
than
before she
routine
cracks.
operational planning.
He's relentless.
Presidential authorization required,
scrubbing. Maybe
National
you'll earn your
Security
keep.
Directive
Don't look
level
up, just
clearance.
keep cleaning.
His voice gained momentum like someone following logical conclusions toward understanding
The
that
incident was
redefined
localized
his
within the
assessment
Omega
of
sector,
who he'd
Commander.
been dealing
And the
with.
cause?
Who the hell are
cause?
you?
We expect a
If
full
you think you
report by
figured out who this
0800.
woman is, you're probably wrong. The real revelation is about to drop, and it's bigger than anything you're imagining. Comment your wildest guess before the truth comes out.
Look at her
The
checking
question
the
hung in
names.
the air like smoke from a discharged weapon, carrying
what
with it
she's really looking
implications that
for.
could reshape everything they thought they understood about
The
maintenance
selector switch
workers,
is right here.
classified military
Semi-automatic
installations,
engagement only.
and the operational
showing
authority
off.
required to activate defense systems
trust
that
her.
existed
Did she
beyond the
really
reach
trigger
of
the
normal
ACE
command
protocol?
structures. But before Brinley could provide the explanation
She's not
that would
even
finally
scared.
reveal her true identity and operational
As you can see,
designation,
the
the
ACE
corridor's
system handles the
reinforced
primary
walls
encryption
suddenly
across all
shook with the
bands.
impact of
The interface
explosive
simplifies the
charges
frequency
that belong
hopping
to
sequence.
professional
And the
breach
filter?
Your data sheet
operations
indicates
rather than
these
random
plates failed the
assault
kinetic
activities.
impact test,
External
Lieutenant. Explain
forces had
yourself.
reached
The
their
field tests
position,
show they perform
and the
above
final
standards, sir.
confrontation
The
that
data
would
is
determine
flawed.
whether American
revised cache
counterintelligence
discovery protocol
operations
designates
succeeded
this
in
area for
protecting
immediate
national
retrieval.
security
Phase
assets,
1
or
begins
whether
now.
hostile intelligence
Did you see that
networks
smirk?
achieved their
Is the
objective
ACE
of
system
eliminating
active yet?
threats to their
Almost there. Look at her
operational
go. He
capabilities
seems
was about
pleased.
to begin. Through the reinforced walls, they could hear the distinctive sounds of shaped charges being positioned
units,
with the
this is
kind of
command. We
professional
have a confirmed
precision
breach at
that
Sector
belonged to
Gamma.
people who'd learned to breach hardened positions through superior equipment and tactical training rather than brute force application. Shaped charges, Brinley announced, her voice carrying the clinical
that really
precision
her?
of someone who'd learned to identify explosive
they call
signatures
Ace.
through professional
like
experience
it.
rather than theoretical study. Professional
Who is she?
placement, coordinated detonation timing. They'll
never
breach in
seen
90
anything like it.
seconds. The
didn't
timeline
stand a
transformed their
chance.
defensive positioning from stable
we move 'em
security
yet?
to immediate crisis,
Not until
requiring
she's
rapid
finished.
tactical response based on professional
He looks
competence
rough.
rather than institutional protection.
Nightingale is down.
But as the
Repeat,
external
Nightingale
assault
is down.
forces prepared to breach their
really
secured
necessary?
position, Colt Ryder finally
He's
found the
baiting her.
courage to ask the question that had been building throughout their entire interaction. From routine personnel harassment to recognition that they were dealing with someone whose professional competence exceeded their understanding.
Seismic
Who are
activity
you
is
really?
increasing.
He demanded, his voice
Get behind
carrying the
cover.
weight
The
of
door is
personal
compromised.
recognition mixed with professional
You thought you could
respect
undermine me
that
in my
belonged
own
to people
command
who'd
center.
learned to
That
distinguish between
insignia means
appearance
nothing
and
here,
reality
Commander.
through
This is an
experience that
ACE
challenged their
operation
assumptions
now.
about strength, capability, and institutional authority. Brinley checked her weapon systems one final time, ensuring that her equipment was prepared for the kind of close-quarters engagement that would determine whether she completed her 18-month
Ace is always
counterintelligence
efficient.
mission or became another casualty in
Medevac,
the
this is
ongoing
Viper
war
Actual.
between American
Priority
special
1 transport
operations and
inbound.
hostile
I
intelligence
repeat, clear the
networks
landing
that
zone
had achieved
immediately.
dangerous
We are moving
levels of
now.
institutional penetration.
These nodes are
When
compromised.
she looked up from
We
her
move at
equipment
0600.
preparation, her remaining eye held
actually
depths
did
that
it.
belonged to people who'd seen
told
combat
you
in
she
places that didn't appear on
Gage, male,
tourist maps,
GSW to the
and
left
had learned to
chest.
carry
BP is 80 over
responsibility
palp.
for
He received 1
operations
unit
that
pack cells.
existed beyond the
Attention, pneumo
reach of
suspected,
conventional
applying seal now.
explanation. Brinley Knox died in Kandahar province, she said quietly, her voice carrying authority that belonged to people who'd learned to command under
He's here.
pressure that could break normal human psychology. She was a civilian contractor who filed
Just keep the channel
paperwork in
secure.
administrative
She's almost
offices
done.
until an IED blast taught her the difference between bureaucratic safety and operational reality. She paused, letting the personal history settle
Look at
like
her
stones
go.
dropped into still water
She actually
before
pulled it
continuing
off.
with the professional revelation that would finally explain everything about her presence at the compound and
at
the
that
mission
hair.
that had brought her back
Think
from
she's
official
invincible.
death. I'm
We'll see how
Phantom,
long that
she
lasts.
continued, her voice gaining the authority that belonged to people who had finally stopped pretending to be less than they were. Master Chief Petty Officer, Naval Special
do you give
Warfare
her?
Development Group. 11
5 minutes
confirmed
tops before
kills.
she cracks.
Kill on site designation
He's
by
relentless.
multiple hostile organizations.
Keep scrubbing. Maybe
Her
you'll earn your
remaining eye
keep.
focused
Don't
on
look
each of
up,
them
just
with the
keep
kind of
playing.
direct attention that belonged to people sharing classified information that could affect
The
national
incident was
security.
localized within the Omega
And
sector,
for the past
Commander.
18
And the
months,
KOS?
I've been
The
hunting
KOS?
the networks
We
that
expect a
sell
full
American
report by
operator
0800.
identities to foreign intelligence services. The revelation hit the corridor like artillery fire, transforming everything they thought they understood about maintenance workers into something
Look at her
that
checking the
belonged in
names.
classified operational briefings, where the participants
Wonder what
included
she's
people
really
whose
looking
existence
for.
was protected by congressional oversight and
The selector
presidential
switch is
signatures.
right here.
But it was what she said
Semi-automatic
next that
engagement
revealed
only.
the true scope
Look
of
at
the
her showing
mission
off.
that had brought her back from official death to
trust her.
conduct operations
really
that
trigger
existed
the
beyond
ACE
the reach of
protocol?
conventional military authority. Nash
her, she's
Vaughn
not
was
even
just the
scared.
beginning, she said, checking her equipment one final
As you
time
can
as
see,
the
the
sounds of
ACE
explosive
system handles the
placement
primary
continued
encryption
beyond the
across all
reinforced
bands.
walls.
The interface simplifies
The network
frequency
includes
hopping
personnel
sequence.
at multiple
And the
levels
Your
of
data sheet
Special
indicates
Operations
these plates
Command,
failed the kinetic impact
intelligence
test,
assets
Lieutenant.
who've
Explain
been
yourself.
systematically
Field tests show
exposing
they perform
American
above
operators
standard,
to
sir.
hostile
The data is
elimination.
flawed.
The
Her voice
revised
gained
cache
momentum
discovery
like someone
protocol
delivering
designates
mission
this area
briefings
for
that
immediate
carried
retrieval.
implications for
Phase one
national
begins
security.
now.
My mission is to
Did you see that
identify
smirk?
and eliminate
Is the
every
ACE
asset in the
system active
network
yet?
before they can
Almost there. Look at her
compromise
go.
additional
He seems
operations
pleased.
or personnel. The mission statement transformed their understanding of her 18-month presence at the compound
All units,
from
this is
routine
command.
personnel
We have a
management
confirmed
to
breach at
something that
Sector Gamma.
belonged in counterintelligence
Red.
operations, where the stakes involved protecting the operational capabilities of American special forces against systematic compromise by hostile intelligence networks. Nash's
really
expression shifted to something that might have been
The one they
genuine
call
respect,
Ace.
mixed with professional
like it.
recognition of superior operational planning and
she?
execution. 18 months of investigation,
I've never
he
seen
said,
anything like
his
it.
voice carrying the weight
He
of
didn't
someone
stand
who
a
just
chance.
understood the scope of the operation that
Should we
had been
move him yet?
conducted around him without his
Not
knowledge.
until she's finished.
Deep cover penetration, long-term
He looks
intelligence
rough.
gathering, the kind of patient operational
is down.
development
Repeat,
that
Nightingale is
requires
down.
congressional authorization and
necessary?
presidential oversight. But as
baiting
Nash
her.
processed the implications of Phantom's mission, the shaped charges positioned by external assault forces reached optimal placement timing, and their secured corridor suddenly became the focal point of a breach operation designed to
Seismic
eliminate
activity
threats
is
to
increasing.
international intelligence
behind
cooperation
cover. The door is
through superior
compromised.
application of
You
professional
thought you could
violence.
undermine me in
The
my own
explosion
command center.
transformed their
That
defensive
insignia
positioning
means
from
nothing
stable
here,
security
Commander.
to
This is an
immediate combat
ACE
requiring
operation
rapid
now.
response based on professional competence rather than theoretical preparation. Through the breach created by shaped charges, assault team members equipped with
cleared that
military-grade
fast.
weapons and professional tactical coordination began entering their
Ace is always
position
efficient.
with the kind of systematic precision
Medevac,
that
this is
belonged to
Viper
people who
Actual.
trained for this
Priority one
specific
transport
scenario.
inbound.
But
I
as
repeat,
hostile
clear the
forces
landing zone
moved to
immediately.
secure their
We are moving
operational
now.
objectives through
These nodes are
elimination of
compromised.
personnel
We
who
move at
threatened
0600.
intelligence cooperation agreements,
She actually
they
did it.
discovered that their intelligence
I told
about
you
the
she
target's
would.
capabilities had
Gage,
been
male,
fundamentally
GSW to the left
inadequate
chest.
for the level
BP
of
is 80 over
professional
palp. He
competence they
received 1 unit
actually
pack
faced.
cells. Attention,
Phantom
pneumo
moved through the
suspected, applying
corridor
seal
with the
now.
kind of controlled violence that belonged to legends, rather than routine personnel files. Her weapon systems coordinated with tactical positioning that demonstrated
He's
training
here.
that exceeded the capabilities capabilities of the assault team members who'd been sent to eliminate her.
Just keep the
One by
channel
one,
secure. She's
external
almost
hostile
done.
forces were neutralized through application of superior training and professional competence rather than superior numbers or equipment. Each engagement demonstrated tactical capabilities that belonged to people who'd learned to eliminate threats under circumstances where failure meant mission failure, and mission failure meant consequences that extended far beyond individual survival.
We'll see how long that
When the
lasts.
engagement ended, the corridor contained evidence of tactical superiority applied with surgical precision against professional opponents who had underestimated
How
the
long do you give her?
operational capabilities they were facing.
minutes tops
Nash
before she
Vaughn's
cracks.
expressions cycled through
He's
professional
relentless.
respect, genuine surprise,
Maybe you'll earn your
and
keep.
something that
Don't
might have
look
been
up, just
dawning
keep playing it.
comprehension of the scope of the counterintelligence operation that had been conducted around him for
The
18
incident was
months.
localized within the Omega sector,
Phantom,
Commander.
he said
And the
quietly,
KOS?
the
And the
call
KOS?
sign
We
carrying weight
expect a
that
full
belonged to
report by
operational
0800.
legends rather than routine personnel designations. Master Chief Petty Officer, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. His voice gained momentum
Look
like
at her
someone
checking the
following
names.
logical conclusions toward understanding that
Wonder
redefined
what she's
everything
really
he
looking
believed
for.
about institutional capabilities and
The
operational
selector
authority.
switch is right here.
You're the ghost that's
Semi-automatic
been hunting
engagement only.
ghosts.
Look at
The
her showing
recognition
off.
transformed their interaction from routine
trust her.
personnel assessment
really
to
trigger
something
the
that
ACE
belonged in
protocol?
professional acknowledgement between people whose careers
Look
had
at her, she's not even
intersected through
scared.
classified operations that existed beyond the reach
As you
of
can see, the
conventional
ACE
military
system handles
authority.
the primary
But as the
encryption across
immediate
all
tactical
bands.
situation
The interface
stabilized
simplifies the
through
frequency
elimination
hopping
of
sequence.
external threats,
Your data sheet
Gage
indicates
Sterling's
these
medical
plates failed the
condition
kinetic
continued to
impact test,
deteriorate,
Lieutenant. Explain yourself.
requiring
The field
immediate
tests show they perform
evacuation
above
and
standards,
professional
sir. The
medical
data is
care
flawed.
that
The
extended
revised
beyond
cache
battlefield
discovery protocol
emergency
designates
treatment.
this area for
Phantom
immediate
moved to his
retrieval.
position with the
Phase
kind of
one
rapid
begins
medical
now.
assessment that
Did you see
belonged
that
to
smirk?
people who'd learned to
Is the
provide
ACE
emergency
system active
care
yet?
while maintaining
there. Look at her
tactical
go.
awareness of
He seems
security
pleased.
situations that could change without warning. Medevac required, she announced, her voice carrying
All
authority
units,
that
this is
belonged to
command.
people
We have
who'd
a
learned to
confirmed breach at
coordinate
Sector
emergency
Gamma.
response through institutional systems, rather than improvisational adaptation. Immediate transport to trauma facility. Professional surgical intervention required for internal damage assessment
her?
and repair. The medical evaluation
they call
transformed
ACE.
their tactical success
Looks
into
like it.
ongoing responsibility for personnel care
is
that
she?
required coordination with external medical
never seen
resources and
anything like it.
institutional support
He
systems.
didn't stand a chance.
This story connects to something massive in the
Should we
special
move him yet?
operations world.
Not
Hit
until
that
she's
notification bell because you won't want to miss what happens
looks
when
rough.
these hidden warriors finally surface from
Nightingale
the
is down.
shadows.
Repeat,
As
Nightingale is
emergency
down.
medical systems responded to
necessary?
Phantom's coordination requests,
He's baiting
arriving
her.
with the kind of rapid deployment that belonged to institutional preparedness for casualties resulting from classified operations. The compound's security status began transitioning from crisis management to
Seismic
operational
activity is
cleanup.
increasing.
Nash Vaughn
Get
and his
behind
surviving
cover. The
team
door is
members were
compromised.
secured for transport to
You thought
federal
you could
detention
undermine me in my own
facilities where their
command center.
intelligence
That
cooperation
insignia
with
means
hostile
nothing here,
services would be
Commander.
processed
This is
through
an
judicial
ACE
systems
operation now.
designed to handle espionage cases involving military personnel and classified information. But as institutional systems began processing the aftermath of the
cleared that
counterintelligence
fast.
operation, Phantom received communication through classified
ACE is always
channels that
efficient.
suggested her mission was far from complete.
Medevac, this is Viper
Ghost
Actual.
Protocol control to
Priority one
Phantom,
transport
the voice
inbound.
crackled
I
through
repeat,
secure
clear the landing
communication
zone
equipment.
immediately. We are
Mission
moving
status
now.
report required.
These nodes are
Intelligence
compromised.
indicates
We move at
network
0600.
extends beyond current operational
She actually did it.
parameters. Additional assets
told you she
require
would.
identification and
Gauge, mail,
neutralization.
GSW to the
The
left
transmission
chest. BP is
transformed
80
their
over Cal.
tactical
He
success
received one
into
unit pack
ongoing
cells.
operational
Attention, new most suspected,
responsibility
applying
that
seal
extended
now.
far beyond the compound and the personnel who had been compromised through 18 months of careful investigation. Phantom consulted her communication equipment,
He's here.
accessing classified databases that painted an increasingly complex picture of intelligence
the channel
network
secure.
penetration
She's almost
into
done.
American special operations communities at multiple levels of command authority. Network confirmation, she reported, her voice carrying the clinical precision
go.
of someone conducting professional
actually pulled
assessment
it off.
rather than speculation about theoretical possibilities. Multiple facilities, systematic personnel
at that hair.
compromise. Intelligence
she's
suggests
invincible.
coordinated international
how long that
operation
lasts.
against American special operations capabilities. The assessment expanded their understanding of the threat from isolated security compromise to something
How
that
long do you give
belonged
her?
in national security
minutes
scenarios
tops
where the
before
stakes
she
involved
cracks.
protecting the operational
relentless.
effectiveness of American special
scrubbing.
forces
Maybe you'll earn
against
your keep.
systematic
Don't look up.
elimination
Just keep
by
playing it.
hostile intelligence networks. As medical personnel completed their emergency treatment of
The
Gage
incident was
Sterling
localized
and
within the
prepared
Omega
him for
sector,
transport
Commander.
to trauma
And the KOS?
facilities equipped to
KOS?
handle
expect a
combat-related
full report by
injuries,
0800.
he managed to focus on Phantom 1 final time. "Kandahar," he whispered, his voice barely audible but carrying personal weight that belonged to people trying to
Look at her
communicate
checking the
gratitude
names.
for actions that had saved their lives under circumstances where
she's really
heroism
looking
meant the
for.
difference between survival and becoming
The
casualty
selector switch
statistics.
is right here.
Thank you for
Semi-automatic
saving my
engagement
team,
only.
for finishing the
showing
mission.
off.
The recognition transformed their
trust her.
reunion from
Did she really
operational
trigger the
coincidence to
ACE
something that
protocol?
belonged in personal acknowledgement between
Look at
people
her,
who
she's not
shared
even
experience
scared.
that existed beyond the reach of conventional explanation.
As you can see, the
But as
ACE
emergency
system
medical
handles the
systems
primary encryption
transported
across
Gage to
all
facilities
bands.
where his
The interface
survival would
simplifies the
depend on
frequency hopping
surgical
sequence.
expertise
And the
and
field-
Your
advanced
datasheet
medical
indicates these
technology,
plates
Phantom
failed the
faced the
kinetic
decision
impact
that
test,
would
Lieutenant.
define the
Explain
next
yourself.
phase of
field
her
tests show they perform
counterintelligence
above
mission.
standards, sir.
Colt
The
and
data is
Nash remained
flawed.
in the corridor,
revised
their
cache
earlier
discovery
assumptions
protocol
about maintenance
designates this
workers
area
and
for
security
immediate
assessments
retrieval.
fundamentally
Phase one begins
transformed
now.
through recognition
Did you
that
see
they'd
that
been
smirk?
interacting with
Is the
someone whose
ACE system
professional
active yet?
competence exceeded
Almost
their
there. Look at her
understanding
go.
of institutional
He seems pleased.
capabilities and operational authority. "What happens now?" Colt asked, his voice carrying the weight
All
of someone
units,
who'd
this is
learned to
command. We
distinguish
have a
between
confirmed breach at
appearance
Sector
and
Gamma.
reality through experience that challenged fundamental assumptions about strength, capability, and the nature of service in environments where conventional categories became inadequate for describing
that
actual
really her?
human potential. Phantom checked her
The one they call
communication
Ace.
equipment one final time,
like it.
accessing classified mission updates that
Who is
painted a
she?
complex picture of hostile networks threatening
never seen
American
anything
special
like it.
operations.
He didn't
The
stand
network
a chance.
extends beyond this compound, she said,
Should we move
her
him
voice
yet?
carrying operational
Not
authority.
until she's finished.
Multiple facilities, systematic
He looks rough.
compromise, international coordination
Nightingale is
between
down.
hostile
Repeat,
intelligence
Nightingale is down.
services. Her
Is that really
remaining eye
necessary?
focused on each of them with direct intensity.
He's baiting her.
My mission continues. Other compounds, other moles, other networks that need elimination before they compromise additional American operators. But as she prepared to leave, Phantom offered something more valuable than
activity is
tactical
increasing.
intelligence. The
behind
disability
cover. The door is
discrimination,
compromised.
she said quietly.
You thought
The
you could
assumptions
undermine
about
me in my own
weakness,
command center.
judgment based
That
on
insignia
appearance
means
rather than
nothing here,
competence.
Commander. This
She
is an
gestured toward
ACE
evidence of her
operation
tactical
now.
superiority. These attitudes create vulnerabilities that hostile services exploit to compromise American security. Nash, despite his secured
cleared
status,
that fast.
nodded with professional acknowledgement. Cultural change that prevents
Yeah, Ace is
hostile
always
services
efficient.
from exploiting American prejudices
Medevac,
as
this is
operational
Viper Actual.
camouflage.
Priority
As
one,
federal
transport
systems
inbound.
process the
I repeat, clear the
counterintelligence
landing zone
operation,
immediately.
Phantom
We are
received
moving
her
now.
next assignment.
These nodes
Orders
are
received,
compromised.
new
We move at
facility,
0600.
additional networks requiring
She actually did it.
elimination. Before departure,
I told you
she
she
offered
would.
Colt final guidance.
Mail, GSW
Everyone you
to the
meet is
left
fighting
chest.
battles
BP
you
is
can't
80 over
see.
Palp.
Everyone
Received 1 unit
deserves
pack cells.
recognition based
Attention
on
units
actions,
suspected. Applying
not
seal now.
appearance. Strength comes in forms that don't fit conventional expectations. In her former maintenance closet, she left a challenge coin with Phantom's insignia
He's
and
here.
engraved words: service without
Yeah.
recognition, strength without advertisement,
Just keep
honor
the channel
without
secure.
expectation.
She's almost done.
As transport carried her toward the next mission, word spread through classified channels about institutional vulnerabilities requiring cultural development to prevent
Look at
future
her go.
compromise. The Ghost was
actually
hunting
pulled it
again.
off.
Networks threatening American operators would face systematic elimination by someone who'd learned that true
at that
strength
hair.
meant protecting
Thinks
others
she's
through
invincible.
invisible actions.
We'll see
The
how long
maintenance
that
worker
lasts.
was gone, but Phantom remained, hunting in shadows that protected American warriors from threats that would learn too late. Some ghosts choose when to haunt
How long
and
do you
when
give
to
her?
hunt.
5 minutes tops before she cracks.